You're
right.
such an asshole with that slide, man. With the title. I'm sorry.
All right. We're podcasting. Welcome to Well, There's Your Problem. A very solemn podcast about engineering disasters where we're not going to make any jokes at all.
No, that's right.
No jokes.
Zero
jokes. You know, I just realized I didn't change the text from the goddamn news from the Joe Kennedy headline.
That's probably fine.
That's probably fine. Yeah. Okay.
Nobody's gonna notice that.
Yeah. Exactly. Liam,
Wait,
you're very quiet.
Are you saying that you forgot something on the Never Forget episode?
Oh my god.
You're supposed to have total recall.
It's already
Am I very quiet? How's that?
A little bit louder.
A little bit louder.
That sounds good.
Oh, you sound good to me.
Yeah.
Not that I'm mad.
Oh, buddy.
No, you're quiet again.
I am goddamn working on it, man.
Okay.
Have you tried simply talking into the microphone?
Maximum gain. Maximum gain.
Okay. Here we are.
Should we start slightly over?
Start the recording. Okay. Well, we're I think we're going good. Welcome to Where's Your Problem? It's a podcast about engineering disasters. Today we're going to talk about an engineering disaster that we can't forget what it is.
That's right.
Yes.
What is it? I forgot.
Oh, but you can't forget.
Oh, but I did.
You're supposed not to do that.
Don't
my bad.
Some disasters you sometimes forget. Other disasters you never forget.
Not allowed.
Not allowed to forget. It's like imprinted on your memory with like cattle brander, you know? It just says 9/11.
Yeah.
You're walking around some days, you're like, Lusitania disaster? I don't remember what that is. And then the Twin Towers pop into your mind and you never forget.
That's right, baby. It's the 9/11 episode.
Yeah, we're going to do 9/11 today. We're really only going to
don't get me on any more lists by saying the phrase "we're going to do 9/11."
I'm not going. You can't do 9/11 because 9/11 has already been done.
Again.
I believe a September 11th happens every year, Justin.
Yes. Well,
the date up every year.
I think the next 9/11 that happens, it'll be something other than the Twin Towers of the World Trade Center being hit by airplanes, because there's only one of them now.
I mean, raising the cursed prospect of, like, you know how you have Civil War reenactors, a 9/11 reenactor.
Oh my God.
I think the new tower would be a lot harder to take down. I'm going to be honest, and we will get into that.
Wasn't there that guy that tried to fly a plane into like an office building in Florida in like October of 2001?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it was like an IRS building.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, I remember that.
And I think he killed one IRS guy in his office who just got a Cessna through his window. And nobody else.
Turns out big planes do more damage than small planes. We'll get to that. Anyway, I'm Justin Rosniak. My pronouns are he, him. Okay, go.
I am Alice Corporal-Kelly. My pronouns are she and her.
I'm Liam Anderson. My pronouns are he, him.
And I'm a guest.
Yes, we have a guest.
And I'm a guest. I'm Sean KB, and my pronouns are he, him.
And you're here from the Antifada, which is an excellent podcast that you should listen to.
Yeah, thanks. I'm here from the Antifada, but I think I'm also here. You guys don't give your qualifications anymore, but I'm also here
because I don't have any, and it makes me like salty.
Am I allowed to give my qualifications?
Oh yeah, go for it.
Knock yourself out.
All right, I'm not simply a podcaster. I'm a longtime rank and file union building tradesman, and I work, with big buildings. I work with structural steel. I work with concrete. I work with all the sorts of materials that we're going to be talking about in this episode, including nanothermite.
Yeah, local controlled demolition and allied trades 302.
Yes, local control is important. Local control is important. We can't outsource that demolition, man. NAFTA kills the demolition industry.
They want to send our buildings to China to be demoed. We can't do jobs at home.
Just loaded on a barge with a big crane. Away it goes. Before we talk about 9/11, we have to do the goddamn news. You can see I already forgot something for this episode,
that's right.
which is
Is it
to
just
change
saying
the
news?
deck. Yeah, no, because this was yesterday. Excuse me, this was last episode when we were talking about not even last episode, the episode before last when we were talking about Joe Kennedy.
But now we are bullying buses and we're body shaming them specifically for having batteries on them.
I think so. Yeah. So our local transit agency,
not officially a crack. You're an idiot.
Yeah.
SEPTA's not idiots. You're an idiot.
It could be bullying works for these other top stories on the right here, like Pennsylvania unemployment rate drops to 10.3%. Hospitality and leisure are still suffering. Maybe those workers are getting bullied.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
But there's not enough jobs in bullying right now. So bullying works by getting people to work.
And they closed down the bullying factory.
That's right.
I'm here with bullying local 103. We're a union of bullies, not affiliated with the police unions. We are workers. We work to ensure nerds get their swirlies as needed.
For too many years, the good jobs, the good lockers have been sent down south and then overseas. We want to keep the lockers here at home so we can bully people and push them into those lockers in our hometown.
That's who you want doing a solidarity strike with you is the bullies union.
Oh, yeah.
just absolutely taking some scabs and just like pushing them into giant inflatable lockers.
It's actually just Teamsters.
They literally are the bullying union. That's true.
Meet Scabby the locker.
So last year, SEPTA bought a bunch of battery powered buses, right?
Oh, they sure did.
And they decided to deploy them on former trolley bus routes. That's where they had electric buses that draw power from overhead lines.
Right. And they spit on the graves. Yes.
Yes. And what happened is apparently they had to take the buses out of service last February and didn't tell anyone. And because all the frames cracked because the batteries are too heavy.
Inside job, 9/11, controlled demolition, Google loose change SEPTA.
They could have used lithium batteries, but instead they went with the much too heavy and bulky nanothermite battery.
Investigate SEPTA.
What they could have used were the overhead lines.
The wires are already up. We don't even have to say put up some goddamn wires. They're already up.
Couldn't do that.
This was just incredibly embarrassing that like they bought these new high-tech buses that use worse technology than what they already had. You know, it's more extractive. They need these big lithium batteries as opposed to just some copper wires over the street. And they broke just immediately. Like,
have you considered that perhaps the actual conspiracy is that they needed one more reason to overthrow governments in countries like Bolivia?
Yeah, that's right. Need to keep Janine Áñez in power.
That's right.
I'll bring that up in the next board meeting. Anyway, that was the goddamn news. We got a long episode today. We had to keep it short.
News.
Yes.
News you can use.
I was quoted in that article. I forgot to mention that.
We're all very proud of you.
You were local.
Moving on.
Okay, we're moving on.
Yeah, that's right, motherfucker.
Starting here with the Retro World Trade Center.
Yes, actually, this was the world's largest office building for a while. Hudson Terminal in Lower Manhattan, right? This was on the site of the World Trade Center before the World Trade Center was there. So this was just a big office building for the Hudson and Manhattan Railroad. It had offices for the railroad, but mostly offices for other businesses because the railroad wasn't that big because it just went from Newark, New Jersey to Lower Manhattan, right? And this railroad connected 3 of the 5 big West Shore of the Hudson Railroad terminals. Those were Exchange Place, Pavonia, and Hoboken Terminal. And it went to Midtown and downtown Manhattan, right? Only Hoboken Terminal still in use. This railroad is now known as the Port Authority Trans-Hudson Railroad, or the PATH, right?
Still kicking to this day.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
It's an outside transfer, though, so it's, I don't know. I barely use the fucking thing. Plus, you'd have to go to Jersey.
Yeah, I've only used it, like, I think twice in my entire life.
It was, I will say, it was not a pleasant experience in the one time I took it with you.
Well, I think that was more due to people and not the trains themselves.
No, that was due to
the natural enemy of trains.
Yes. So, Lower Manhattan in the early 1910s, this building was put up in 1909. Lower Manhattan, there's this tangled up mess of the Hudson and Manhattan Railroad, the Interborough Rapid Transit, the Brooklyn Manhattan Transit, and the independent subways, right? And this is why Lower Manhattan real estate was very valuable. This is where the first skyscrapers show up. They eventually spread to Midtown, right? And once Midtown becomes more valuable, the New York City Tunnel Authority was created, right? And that's to bring more people from Jersey into New York City. Always a bad idea. That was, you would think this is a Robert Moses thing, but it was not. This was headed by an angry old Norwegian man named Ole Singstad.
Oh, wow.
Well, am I allowed to use the S slur on this show?
What the fuck is the S slur?
Okay, I'll say it quietly and gently. Squarehead. I work in the New York City building trade. Some of our unions, some of our locals were founded by squareheads back in the day. Some of them, up until like 30, 40 years ago, you could barely be an Italian, let alone an Irishman, and be in some of these locals because it was all Norwegians, all Finns, blah, blah, blah.
You couldn't get made because you weren't full Swedish chef.
They had to measure your head and make sure it was square enough.
Inga Dinga Durgan. Leif Erikson Day is a big celebration. That's the thing out here in Philly. Leif Erikson Day just brings out the Nazis.
Because then the statue gets pushed into the river.
There's one stretch of the in between where the BQE turns into the Belt Parkway called Leif Erikson Way, Leif Erikson Way, and that's because it used to be Little Norway, Little Scandinavia in Brooklyn.
Oh, right, because Robert Moses, that was like one of the first highways he drove through an ethnic neighborhood.
That's right, and it was the Swedes who got it.
Yeah, the Swedes got it first. Oh,
the canary in the coal mine.
Yeah. So Ole Singstad, he got to work in the 1930s. His authority built the Holland Tunnel, the Lincoln Tunnel, the Queens Midtown Tunnel, and he got through half of the Brooklyn Battery Tunnel before Robert Moses managed to fire him because he didn't want anyone building anything that wasn't with Robert Moses's express permission. They hated each other, Singstad and Moses. Probably not the least because Moses drove like the highway through the Swedish neighborhood.
Robert Moses famously insensitive to urban residents' needs.
It turns out he was kind of racist.
I'm learning so much, though, that he was racist against... I didn't even know Leif Erikson Day was a thing. I thought you were doing a bit about Columbus Day, and I was like, oh, that's a good joke. But no, it's a real thing.
Yeah, yes, we really have Leif Erikson Day, yes.
I know this is crazy to you, person who lives in the United Kingdom, but there are actually places outside of the Commonwealth. I know.
Yeah, but like it's not that there are people like places outside of it. It's that anyone takes Scandinavians seriously.
Oh, come on. Sobs are nice. I don't mind Gravlocks.
I quite like it.
The Swedes have produced snus, the greatest tobacco product known to man.
That's right.
Shameless plug for buysnus.com, who I can no longer buy from, but who continue to send me about 10 emails a day. And they mean it when they say overnight shipping, folks.
They're better at social democracy than anyone else, but, that's because of the oil.
But you get to keep all your good American racism.
This is true, yeah.
If you like your racism, you can keep it.
If you really want to fly a Confederate flag in Europe, the place to go is Scandinavia.
You know what's? It's so fucking weird, man, to see like obviously I understand that all Europeans basically are dumb as hell. That's right. It's a war against the whole continent now, baby. That like we'll use like Confederate flags as stand-ins for like Nazi and other sort of super nationalist flags. I'm just like, yes, okay, so we need to ban it. And I'm not a big fan of federal government overreach, but I personally would support a law, and if you're flying a Confederate flag on your private property, you just get shot. Like the National Guard comes in and just shoots you.
Yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
No, go ahead, Sean.
Oh no, Liam, did you see online that there's an account that's pushing the Scots-Irish Trump movement that's putting Confederate flags next to the Ulster flag?
I did see that, and it's like, yeah, they're this. What corporate needs you to tell the difference between these two images? They're the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
It's always so fucking weird when you see like an Irish Protestant in the wild, and you're just like, oh right, you dumb assholes actually exist.
You Ian Paisley looking motherfucker, you.
All right.
I hear a siren in the back.
Yes, that was the police coming to get me.
For your Confederate flag you're flying.
Yeah, exactly.
We once flew a Gadsden flag and someone just took it, but it was also like right before Trump got elected. So I was like, I'm just so mad that the fucking like chud conservatives took the "Don't Tread on Me" flag. Like what you should have genuinely pisses me off. I have the Naval Jack version.
Yeah, what you should have had was the "Come and Take It" flag, because then you couldn't have been mad that someone did in fact come and take it.
Ross has already made that joke to me.
Yeah, this is true.
You're late, Alice. You're late, Alice.
Well, you also have a "Come and Take It" flag.
Yes, I do.
Yeah.
It's Alice flag. I like flags.
Has anybody
I don't like chuds. No, I just don't know where it is.
It's a challenge to the listener. Take Liam's flag.
Yeah, no,
it's hard to do if you lost it.
We were talking earlier about parasocial relationships and how like we like active like if you come and try and jump our fence, you'll be shot. I will add to that though. If you try and jump the fence, but you manage to take the flag, you will be allowed to proceed without being shot.
This is like the most dangerous game with more steps.
You know what? I get bored, Sean.
Yeah.
I get bored.
Don't we all?
I sit and I look at the Ukrainian Orthodox Church across the street from me all day, and I just think to myself, why couldn't you just be Catholic?
Like the anti-Azov battalion front.
The effect of these tunnels was to make Midtown Manhattan real estate easier to access from the Jersey suburbs by car than downtown, right? Since your suburban commuters could drive in more easily, and also like the big rail terminals were there that were in Manhattan, like Penn Station and Grand Central, right? So by the 1940s, downtown Manhattan had started to get real cheap, right? Companies started moving out. There were a lot of vacant office buildings. There's not a lot of restaurants, cultural amenities. The whole place looked like a ghost town after 5 o'clock, right? So the idea is, how do we revitalize this area? And what the New York City government came up with was more office space. So they start thinking about building a World Trade Center, right?
Oh, a World Trade Center?
Yes.
Crazy.
So there's lots of World Trade Centers out there, right? What's a World Trade Center? It's a fancy office building which has paid for a license to call itself a World Trade Center from the World Trade Centers Association.
Wait, that's actually like a protected term?
Yes.
Yeah, that was one that honestly blew my mind.
You can't just slap up a World Trade Center sign on your house.
What are they gonna fucking do?
The other thing is, what's the benefit of calling yourself, like, why not just Trade Center? Or like one trade center?
It's a brand that is now forever associated with a horrific act of terrorism.
I mean,
who doesn't love that?
People don't think that the World Trade Center has power, but You know, if you fuck around, you might find out. They might send you one of those memes that Saudi Arabia sent to Canada.
Yeah.
Are we saying here that the World Trade Center Association did 9/11?
I like the idea, actually, that like unlicensed World Trade Center, just like the crack team of World Trade Center organization lawyers and operatives just comes in, doesn't do like a bombing campaign, but like what the Mossad did after the Munich massacre, like that sort of thing. Where for 14 years, they're just like shooting building supers in the streets.
Yeah, if you open a bootleg World Trade Center, sleep with one eye open.
Wake up with a horse head in your bed.
But it's a
You
horse
just wake
from
up with
a foreign
big inflatable
country.
globe.
A bloody globe.
So, like, there's a World Trade Center in Boston. There's a World Trade Center in Montreal, which
Both
is,
of
of course,
these look
called,
like malls.
Centre de Commerce Mondial.
Yes.
I noticed you didn't mention the Baltimore one. You're too good. You're too good for the Baltimore one.
Well, it
No,
does look
'cause
like shit.
I wanted to see
It looks horrible. It truly does. It's honestly one of my favorite buildings in Baltimore because it's just so goddamn ugly.
Well, I got the Dallas one because I think it's the most ominous right up here.
Yeah, it looks like an NSA building.
Another one is the Ronald Reagan building in
that's the one
Washington,
you get
D.C.
disappeared to. A good food court. It has a good food court.
Does have a good food court, the Ronald Reagan building.
You just get a million jelly beans.
Yes.
You can have ketchup and it counts as a
Vegetable, yeah.
It's actually kind of a weird way that the World Trade Centers Association was formed. So the first World Trade Center was in New Orleans, actually.
Also, shit.
Yeah, also
Yeah.
sure.
And this was emerged from a series of simple concepts, right? So someone realized people like to make money by buying and selling commodities, right?
Oh.
But also, people like daiquiris.
That is true.
You don't like daiquiris.
I've never had a daiquiri, actually.
I wish I had a daiquiri.
I tried to give you a daiquiri once, and you just yelled at me. You weren't even coherent. You were just, no, rum, throw up. That was the sentence I got out of you.
Yeah. Yeah, because I was like, I've had too much to drink, and rum does nothing good to me.
I will say, I was in New Orleans. When were we in New Orleans? Last April, apparently. And I followed in the footsteps of my dad in New Orleans, where I was just like, 7 fucking a.m. Bloody Mary, baby. Like, it's so good to like watch joggers and people coming home from the bars, not to the bars, from the bars at like the same time, just waving to each other.
Yeah, but did you buy and sell commodities?
I would last like 6 months there in New Orleans if I lived there.
I thought that. I was just like, it's like I'm a pretty heavy drinker, you know, I'm a good Irish boy. And like people there are like frighteningly drunk all the time, but in the way like an SEC strength coach gets fucked up, and you're just like, man, what happened? Like, where are you? Like, what is going on? It's just like, yeah, it's like 11 a.m. and there's like these 55-year-old like Mississippi dudes in like windbreakers, just the drunkest they've ever been outside like a hotel bar, and I'm just like, yep. I can't keep up here.
Also, like you've got to add in the food, right? So, like, even if the booze doesn't kill you, you will find yourself like eating gumbo at 5 a.m, and you'll just die that way. Yeah.
So,
Justin, I have a question for you.
Yes.
Is the World Trade Center in New Orleans the same as the World Trade Mart owned by Clay Shaw?
Oh shit, that's a good
question. I hate to get into conspiracism here on this 9/11 episode.
Triangulation of fire.
So there was an international trade mart which started in New Orleans, right?
Okay, that might be what I'm thinking.
And there was within an accompanying international house hotel, right? And that started actually before World War II. And this was sort of
the World Trade Center Association did not do 9/11, but they did kill JFK.
Yes.
They sent their operators down to Dallas.
So this building actually opened in 1968, 1 year before the World Trade Center in New York City. And that's where the International Trade Mart moved to, right? And your idea here is if you wanted to do trade with the United States, your World Trade Center or your International Trade Mart had a bunch of resources to assist you in doing trade, right? And you could also come to New Orleans to do it and drink daiquiris. Much better than buying steel from Toledo. You come to New Orleans and buy the steel and then get drunk.
And both the steel guy and you get to drink the daiquiris. That's better for everybody.
Exactly.
Okay, so we take that thing of like New Orleans, a place where people like to go, which has good drinks and good weather, and then we apply that to Lower Manhattan.
Yes. Which has neither of those things.
There are like my favorite thing is like the few bars in New York left that are good. Just like none of them are in Lower Manhattan, notably.
Yeah, no, they're not.
Tempest Bar, New York City, baby. Their webpage is one page, and it's them complaining about other bars.
You have a right to, because it's really good. There's no one there. It's cheap. It's right next to Penn Station, so you can get fucked up before your last train out. It's fantastic.
Unless you miss the train, in which case bad things happen.
Well, we did do that.
Did we? Oh, well, we did. We did.
Yeah.
There's the Patriot Bar downstairs, or downtown rather. That's like a cool type place, but it's also got some pretty bad clientele.
There's all kinds of
I'm stunned that the clientele at the Patriot Bar is bad, Sean.
By that I mean people like me, like dirty.
Do not attempt to form a parasocial relationship with any of us. Do not come to these bars.
You will be shot.
Keep listeners away.
Once the DSA moved out of Lower Manhattan, the Antifada crowd moved in.
The vanguard of gentrification.
Yeah. The DSA was actually headquartered in Lower Manhattan for most of its existence.
That's about right.
Yeah.
Barbara Ehrenreich and all them.
The Yippie Museum was there too, I think. I don't know where it is now.
And part of that is because of the World Trade Center. There's so much goddamn office space, it actually kept rents low. Enough for like a socialist organization to rent office space there.
There's an anarchist group that has an entire loft down in Lower Manhattan, not far from Zuccotti Park, and a lot of the organizing and sign making and stuff for Occupy Wall Street happened in this giant industrial loft, like right by Wall Street, because it's so fucking cheap you can afford it.
Jesus.
Well, like the same thing is happening in London right now, where we in Trash Future are looking for office space for our studio, and like it's entirely plausible.
Look at this girl with office space.
Yeah, I know,
with
right?
Office
but
space.
It turns out, as ridiculous as that sounds, now that the economy has imploded, you can get that for nothing. The Shard is entirely empty, and they're just begging you to like fill space
up in the Shard. Holy shit!
That's what I'm saying.
No,
yes.
I would go with the Gherkin. I would definitely go with the Gherkin.
You want to guest on the show? Sure. Our address: the Giant Penis Building.
Yes. All right.
I started the Trash Future building now.
Yeah, that's right.
Pay for naming rights. Yeah.
Look, if Trump can do it, we can do it.
I can't wait to eat Trash Future steaks at the restaurant.
Do you want to spend $88 on a Trash Future branded necktie? Of course you do.
I honestly would.
I would too.
Don't love that it's $88. I'll tell you that, Alice.
Make it a patron goal or something.
Yeah, on the back we've got sewn in "Made in America" with air quotes.
America with 3 Ks.
Yeah, mayonnaise.
Just get a bunch of like unemployed gig workers and get some really cheap office space in downtown Manhattan to make the ties there.
Maybe we could make some shirtwaists.
Reopen the textile mills.
Yes, exactly.
We're Triangle Shirtwaist too. But the triangle is the a Trash Future logo. All right. So, unlike the International Trade Mart in New Orleans, the World Trade Center in New York was going to not only not feature daiquiris, it was also going to be publicly financed. Right? David Rockefeller, who was president of Chase Manhattan Bank, He went in with the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey to
Big
build,
boo on that. Ugh.
yeah, to build the World Trade Center in Lower Manhattan, right? There were a couple of sites that were considered, but what eventually they settled on was on top of the H&M's Hudson Terminal, right? This was sort of towards the tail end of the massive expansion of public authorities' powers, which were sort of pioneered by Robert Moses, but Robert Moses was not directly involved with this project. And, you know, they want to do this big revitalization project. And the World Trade Center was supposed to be 10 million square feet of office space, right? It's just they're going to build a shitload of offices, and this is going to cause office space to be more desirable, right?
Mm-hmm. Famously, when you increase supply, you also increase demand.
Yes,
that does work for highways. It does not work for office space.
Yeah.
See, it was Robert Moses. He was confused about that.
So I love the idea of Robert Moses just like being like, all right, we're going to build the World Trade Center. We're going to put a highway through it. You guys ever been to that hotel in Disney World where the monorail goes right through the basement?
Yeah.
That's exactly what we're going to do.
That was a real plan.
A bunch of times.
That fucking what was a real what?
That was a real plan. There was supposed to be a
Lower
Midtown
Manhattan Expressway.
Oh yeah, the Lower Manhattan, but also the Midtown Highway, which never got built.
Christ Almighty!
Just two freeways, just going through it at different angles, at different heights, circling back around and like curving through both towers.
You guys ever been to Triple Crossing in Richmond? It's like that, but you die. You just die.
The Midtown one was supposed to be built at a height of 100 feet through the. On about 34th Street, I think.
Power Broker has the renderings of it in there, and it would have been an unmitigated fucking disaster.
So
it's
the
crazy.
second of our candidates to possibly do 9/11 after the World Trade Center Association is Robert Moses with a freeway.
A second freeway has hit the towers.
I can't wait. I cannot wait for the comments on that.
Jesus Christ. I don't even want to think about it.
The same shit as always. Don't get mad at us. People are making a podcast about it 19 years later. Get mad at the government that choked and get mad at terrorism.
Yes.
We didn't do anything. We're just here making jokes.
Simply get mad at the Saudi government.
Yeah. And Bush. You can get mad at Bush.
Yeah. You can get mad at Bush.
And H.W. Bush.
And Clinton, actually.
And Clinton, yeah.
Yeah.
It's an idea. Get mad at
Reagan.
Get mad at every president. Get mad at the system that creates these presidents. Get mad at the political economy, that system that creates the United States. Just get mad, but don't get mad at us.
That's right.
Please.
Yeah, that's basically how I feel about it. Like, people, whatever, the respectability concern, bullshit trolling. But like, also, like, yeah, I'm not the fucking one that that flew a plane into the World Trade Center, man. I'm just an asshole in a hotel room in Portland, Maine, with like drinking a Narragansett hard tea, which, by the way, Roz, is disgusting.
Would you say it's likely to be better or worse than the dark fruit cider I had last time?
It's so the one thing I could say in Twisted Tea's favor is that it's not carbonated. This shit is carbonated more than like a soda. Oh. So I'm trying to like choke down that like schoolyard iced tea. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. But it's also been carved to within an inch of its life.
That's grim.
Not feeling it.
No.
Okay, so the government's just going to build a huge fucking office building with the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey, which is sort of quasi-government agency, which has some powers of government, but some powers of a private corporation. It's confusing and irritating. We're not going to go into it right now.
But importantly, they can leverage the income that they get in order to float bonds, in order to get more and more money, so they can build and build and build.
Yes, which, damn, I wish they would still do that.
They did a good job for a while with that.
Yeah, I know. They were doing very well. Robert Moses perfected that. The trick was to keep yourself in debt to the extent that you had an excuse to float more bonds, but not in debt so much that those were a financial burden. You had to have a nice balance.
And all those little nickels falling into those toll machines on the Triborough Bridge, they added up. And then if you fucking leverage those nickels, then it turns into a lot of fucking money. And then you create 6 or 7 or 8 or 10 or 12 different authorities that are all getting different incomes, that are all floating different bonds, and you could fuck up an entire city that way. An entire metropolitan area.
First the Swedes, then the Norwegians, then the Finns, and you just go from there.
Well, I think who do you fuck up after the Swedes? I think it was the Jews after that, mostly.
Yeah, and the Bronx Expressway.
Yeah. But the Port Authority is outside of Moses' control to a large extent. And I think by this time, Moses was kind of on his way out. But yeah, the Port Authority was just going to build a huge office building and lease it, right? A lot of people thought this was a dumb idea at the time, kind of because it was. This is just, the government nakedly getting into leasing office space, as supposedly as, revitalization, but you would figure you'd build something that had more of a public purpose, like, I don't know, housing or something.
Yeah, this is a weird definition of infrastructure here.
Yeah, exactly.
You're telling me that, like, Cantor Fitzgerald and their, like, 300 Rodin casts aren't a public good? Okay, you can't just wander in off the street and see the Rodins, but they're up there, and knowing that they're up there, that's a public good.
Yeah. Now, there was at least some public purpose to this. As part of this deal, the Hudson and Manhattan Railroad would be owned by the Port Authority. That's how they renamed it PATH, right? And they were going to construct a new railroad terminal underneath, which would be more efficient than the one that existed beforehand, right? But that was about the limit of the public benefit here. Otherwise, it's like, yeah, we're going to build a big office building and say, this is good government right here.
It's fine. It's got a train station, sort of.
Yeah.
There you go.
That's why we need to talk about, Sean had a bit about Co-op City and construction in the 70s.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Before I get into this massive project that happened at exactly the same time as the World Trade Center is coming together, people have to realize that New York City through the 60s and all the way up to like 1974 was basically like a municipal social democracy, which is why it sounds crazy for the Port Authority of New York to be creating an entire complex of office buildings, even to lease out in order to bring business back to Lower Manhattan. But there were like public hospitals, there's a free public university, there was a whole municipal like welfare system that existed. So this happens like alongside that. This is part of the post-war New York City social democratic polity, as they call it, which comes to a screeching halt, of course, with the New York City financial crisis, the fiscal crisis of 75. But with that said, before that, here's a quote. This is about Co-op City from the New York Times. Co-op City occupies a special place in the imagination of New York. It is not only the country's largest cooperative apartment complex, it is a sort of working class utopia where, at least according to the original ideals, firefighters, post office workers, plumbers, carpenters, and clerks could afford to buy apartments in which to make homes. So the city of the New York, through what's called the Mitchell-Lama Project, which was a way to like subsidize low and middle income housing, decided, as they kind of ate up all the other like big public housing areas for public housing in the city, to create the largest residential complex in the country and in the world in 1968. And they did that by building 15,000 apartments. I mean, can you guys imagine that? They just threw up these buildings, 15,000. There's 35,000 people that live there, and they just put it up like Le Corbusier towers in the park,
Weird how all you ever hear about 70s and 80s New York is like urban decay, the Warriors, like burning cop cars and shit, and not this. Weird.
Yeah. Because both the World Trade Center and Co-op City live in this weird like liminal period in history where the sort of like Promethean social democratic impulse is still alive, and they're still building like $500 million like working class cooperative apartments funded largely by trade unions. By the way, this was put up by a coalition of New York City trade unions that exists. But then that's why Ford to City dropped dead. That famous Daily News cover right? Where the federal government says no bailout for the city. That's why it was such a shocking thing, because like New York City had been this, and this is the process of it like not being that, very violent. That makes sense.
Mhm.
So basically built with union money, built through the Mitchell-Lama, 1968, same year as the World Trade Center, it starts to go up. Within a few years of building this, right, while the World Trade Center is still going up and while these buildings are completed, then people start moving in. They start to realize little things about the way that these buildings have been constructed. Number one, the windows kept falling out.
Jesus.
Number
Yeah.
two, you'd go out on
Wait,
your balcony and it would collapse. Your balcony would just fall down 30 stories and hit the ground.
That's not good. I would want to
I
avoid
would
that one.
simply not go out on the balcony.
I like balconies. As long as they're not too high.
You know what I like at balconies? You know what I don't like? Falling 30 stories.
Because Co-op City is built on this marginal land, like way up in the north of the Bronx, it's built on marshland. You would think, engineering people out there, that you would do some sort of, I don't know, deep foundation, maybe drive some piles, maybe put the buildings up on the piles.
No, shallow foundations are always fine. 100% of the time.
Turns out it wasn't quite that it was just a slab, but some of the smaller buildings were literally just slabs. The parking garages started to subside within a couple of years. The main big buildings, like the 30-story ones with the balconies that fell off, like those stayed up okay, but the rest of them just started to like sink into the fucking swamp. Not good. Then last but not least, there was supposed to be a thing called reinforced rebar in the concrete. And about half of this entire complex didn't have any rebar in it.
Oh my God.
Jesus.
In their defense, isn't rebar extremely irritating to put in?
I honestly, I say abolish rebar myself. I am willing to stand here on this podcast and say to my brothers and sisters out there, not just in the trades, but all Americans, all the workers in the world, we must come together. We must fight. We must abolish rebar. Not because it's bad, but because it's a pain in the fucking ass. That's what these workers were doing back in the 60s and 70s. They were trying to get ahead of abolishing rebar, and we should respect them for that. However, concrete without rebar, yeah, not so good.
Well, yeah, we should go back to unreinforced masonry.
That's right.
Yes.
You know, maybe especially in like low earthquake zones. I don't know, like on the West Coast, you might have to do some bullshit with like I don't know. You might have to throw some bars in after the fact. You know, but I think you can get away with unreinforced masonry most places.
Cages.
What's that you say? Did you say oriented strand board?
That's the opposite of masonry.
I'm pretty sure you said oriented strand board.
I am also pretty sure you said oriented strand board.
No.
You love
Oriented strand board.
No,
Yes,
oriented strand board.
No, we're doing oriented strand board.
None.
Yes, you do.
No.
So there's two takeaways from the Co-op City story. The first is that it set off among the residents working class residents who had moved in there, many of them who were tradespeople themselves, the largest and most sustained, the biggest rent strike in American history. From 1974 to 1975 for 13 months against the city and state who were trying to make the residents pay for this fuck up. That was actually a successful rent strike, and they won, and they made the state eat it incredibly in a time of like intense austerity where the city was out of money and they were laying people off. These 35,000 New Yorkers came together and like basically held tens of millions of dollars of rent and said, fuck you. And then finally the city and the state, they gave up. But the other important thing for them is that this Co-op City, these residences were built under the same conditions, often by the same workers, certainly some of the same contractors as the Twin Towers of the World Trade Center, and presumably Building 7 as well. So when we're looking for the engineering disaster of the World Trade Center, right, of it collapsing on 9/11, maybe we might want to take into account that a similar project of a similar scale just 10 miles north had mobbed up contractors who stole tens of millions of dollars worth of material and labor. And you had whole situations where things like rebar weren't even put in. So you could read the as-built drawings on what Co-op City looked like or what the World Trade Center looked like. But is that what was actually produced? Is that what a bunch of drunken, doped up, awesome, heroic Chad construction workers actually put in there, or was it just a pipe dream?
The as-built say that this is rebar, but actually the reinforcing element in this is mostly mob snitches.
Chemically treated to make them actually like hold up.
Yeah, it's mostly hoffers down here.
You got to dump some guy in the Gowanus and be like, all right, listen, you're going to have to hold this.
I want an anti-rebar action sticker now.
Yes. Talk about a patron's goal, man. I love that. The workers in the 70s knew, man, it was a very radical time for labor. They knew that when the apprentice showed up in the morning, he better keep the cooler full of beer, cold beer. And they also knew abolish rebar. By that, I mean, just don't put any rebar in there.
Bringing back the spirit of Frank Furness, really, who's he always said, he kept interns in his architecture office to keep the drinks cold.
What is an apprentice but just a dirty intern,
Yes. So with that in mind, 1970s New York City construction. Let's look at how these buildings were put up.
Allegedly put up.
Allegedly put up. All right. Oh boy, this is a lot less legible now that I've switched the background to black.
It's fine. Goth diagram.
They put the architect notes on 2 slides ago. They hired architect Minoru Yamasaki, right? He decided to use a relatively new form of structural design called tube frame construction.
He also decided to design it to like have Middle Eastern architectural features, which is like he designed it to evoke the Great Mosque at Mecca, which is very strange and very ironic.
Well, because he had previously worked on a big airport terminal in Saudi Arabia, which of course the contractor for that was Saudi bin Laden Group.
Of course.
Well,
put a pin in that name there.
If you work on any kind of construction in the Middle East, you will work with Saudi bin Laden Group. They are big players over there. This picture like describes mostly the elevator concept, which will be important later. But sort of the whole concept of the towers here with your tube frame construction is that there's 1 acre of column-free office space on every floor.
Open plan, the way of the future.
So there's a whole bunch of columns on the exterior. They're placed 18 inches apart, and those handle a lot of the weight. And then there's columns in the core, and those also handle a lot of the weight. Those are thicker. But then this area in between, no columns whatsoever. Just open and airy, right?
Put a pin in that too.
Yes. And then your elevator system is interesting, right? Rather than having elevators that start from the ground floor and bring you to any floor, you have a system of local and express elevators, right? So you start at the lobby, right? And then there's a system of local elevators that get you through the first 30 or so floors. If you go higher than that, you take the express elevator to the first sky lobby and then get on the local elevator there. If you want to go higher than that, you get on the other express elevator to go to the third sky lobby. And then there was actually another elevator just for tourists. And then, of course, there was the service elevator where the contractors go and they have to wait a long time for it. And, there's a guy who sits on a crate in there. He's pushed the button for you, because you're not allowed to push the button for some reason.
Explosive charges in there.
Yeah. Could only hold so much nanothermite at one time, but it was pretty effective.
I mean, usually those service elevators are pretty big.
Did you guys ever go to the towers? I guess Alice wouldn't have gone, but
no, before my time.
You did?
Yes, I did.
Oh, cool.
I stayed at the World Trade Center Marriott and Windows on the World, and they never fucking replaced Windows on the World with a good restaurant, which I'm very upset about.
You went to, Rose?
I never went to the towers. I did go to New York City once before 9/11, and I was very small and also terrified of the tall buildings.
They were so fucking tall. We used to skate down there all the time because they were a good place to skate by the Brooklyn Bridge. And you'd stand in between the two towers. And because of the way your vision was, it would look like they were leaning in on you. It was like they were absolutely fucking insane. Like humongous. It's hard to even understand the scale of them until you've like been in them or stood under them. But I'm sorry, go on.
Yeah. So there's a couple interesting features here. One of which is, why were the columns spaced so closely together? And it's not actually for any structural reason. That's an architectural decision because what's his face? The architect. How do I pronounce his name? Yamasaki was afraid of heights.
Mm-hmm.
And here he was designing the tallest building in the world. So, and then the elevator situation, the idea is you save space on the core of the building, right? Because after parking minimums, the main limit on the height of the building is the elevator system. If you ever played Sim Tower, you know that. Which is really just an elevator system. Yeah.
You can see the stairwells here in the core. This has 3 visible, but there should be 4 in each core.
The old code would have required 6, but the new code that had just been in effect after these buildings were designed only required 3. I think you would need 4 now. I'm not sure. I don't know anything about New York City codes.
Good thing they upgraded the code after 9/11.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
So
it's one more.
One of the results of this is that the World Trade Center towers were incredibly light and airy. You can see the sun just shining straight through. You can even see through the core of the building, right? This is partially because this was designed during a particularly lenient period in building construction where they didn't actually need any concrete in the core of the building. It was all steel.
Cool. Sounds fine.
Yeah,
sounds great.
We'll talk about how the fireproofing worked in a bit. Another factor is we have the bathtub down here. They had to excavate out all the way to bedrock to build this whole complex, and they had to build this big slurry wall, to hold back all the water to avoid affecting the water table. You can see here how the 1909 tube from the PATH trains just penetrates straight through the building. They just supported the tube on a bridge while they were building it.
Oh, that's terrific.
Yeah.
Foundations are my work, and I'm looking at this on the right, and I'm just so proud of my people. Good job.
Yeah.
Beautiful.
I mean, those retaining walls, held up like a champ.
You can see here a set of trusses, and those sort of help keep the building together below grade. They also help tie the outer columns into the core. But the main thing we want to look at is you see the load-bearing exterior columns, right? These are all every single piece of facade had a load-bearing column behind it, right? You can also see, I think Atlas Machine Works is what these columns say on them. There's an interesting thing they did is they bid out every individual lot of steel individually. So they got them from all these different manufacturers because they thought it might be cheaper.
Just like the New York City financial crisis basically created neoliberalism in the United States. This is happening right before that. Just bid it out to 1,000 different fucking factories. Roll that steel and just get in under bid. You'll be good.
Yeah,
let's hope it works out.
Yeah. These 2 large Italian men want to come to your office to discuss your steel bid.
Okay, so a huge amount although they bid it out to several companies, a huge amount of the building was built out of basically identical 3-story high sections of steel. You have the 3 columns, you have 3 spandrels, right? And that was over 3 floors, right? You have your structural steel clad in some fireproofing, probably spray on the outside. And then, there's some aluminum panel outside of that, right?
All I can think of while I look at these pieces of steel, being a welder, I'm like, that is a lot of fucking work. That's a lot of lovely man hours of welding and making union rate right there.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, these are probably pretty thick sections of steel. Yeah,
Great work if you can get it.
exactly. And then your floors are of fairly light but fairly standard construction. You got concrete over a metal deck, which is over your steel joists, right? Your truss
they don't need
joist.
to be heavy because all of the weight is in the outside columns and the core, right?
Yeah, you're just bracing into the columns on the outside and you're bracing into the core on the inside. And then there's some funky stuff that happens in the corners, which I'm not quite sure what it is. Yeah, so your main purpose of this is you're bearing the weight from office crap, right?
There's nothing structural in the center. It's just completely open plan. And these are just basically, they just run from the center to the outside, but they're bearing almost no load at all.
Yeah, your concrete here is mostly just to give you like a smooth surface to put flooring on than anything else.
Ornamental concrete.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's carrying like stockbrokers rather than anything heavier.
Yeah, so your load rating is going to be something like, I think at the time it was 80 pounds per square foot.
There's not even a lot of rebar. Allegedly, rebar is just like wire mesh. You're just throwing mesh down and then you're pouring like 4 to 8 inches of concrete on top of it.
I think it did. Yeah, I think it did serve a purpose to sort of tie the exterior columns into the core, but that was spread out over 110 floors, right? So it wasn't no individual truss is doing a lot of work. And the other part of that is because of the hat truss we'll talk about in a second. So yeah, you get some more detail here. You can see there's you have your exterior column, you have sort of, it's bolted in with this sort of angle bracket here with bolts and slotted holes, right? That lets it sort of expand and contract as needed because the building sways with the wind, right?
Why wouldn't you just make it less flexible and stronger?
I was going to say, your main character from that bridge episode came on the gusset plate.
That's right.
The villain is back.
Wow, if it just didn't have expansion joints, it would have been fine. I don't know why they didn't build it with I don't know why they built it with expansion joints. Here we go. Expansion joints did 9/11, folks.
That's right. Having any flexibility in your building system at all is like added to list of 9/11 perpetrators after Mothman.
And so it's rigidity really did 9/11. Or lack of rigidity.
Yeah, exactly. Like, some people say float like a butterfly, sting like a bee, but Alice wants just to be a rock.
Yeah, float like an anchor.
Yes. But yeah, so you can sort of see how these assemblies were bolted into the exterior spandrels here on each floor, right? This is all the same crap we were looking at before. This is before the concrete was poured. And then at the top of the building was something called the hat truss.
Oh, boy.
Now, why do you call it a hat truss?
Because it looks like a hat.
I'm guessing you're going to be distributing something up there. You're going to be moving things toward the center, it looks like.
It is because it's at the top of the building like a hat, yeah.
Just a hat. It's just a hat.
It's just a hat, yeah.
Truss, yeah.
So the hat truss, it's at the top of the building, and it's a very strong structure right here. It ties in the top of the building to the core of the building. The exterior,
Can I ask a question real fast? That hat truss between the top of the building and then the foundation of the building is the only thing that's tying all of these columns, these vertical columns together?
Oh, no, there's 110 floors of trusses as well.
Yeah, but those little weak, like pussy trusses, right?
Yes.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I'm not the architect.
I'm just trying to think of this like in light of the inevitable disaster that's going to happen later on.
Yeah, but the hat truss is the big thing that's holding everything together. Yeah.
A very heavy thing that if you watch the video of what happened to the tower kind of falls by itself at a certain point and then everything else collapses.
Yeah, listen, nothing's going to sever a bunch of those columns.
Yeah, it'd be impossible.
Plant explosives.
Yes. Yeah, so the hat truss is, it's the main thing that holds it together. Everything else is kind of like just those weak ass floor trusses, right? And there's some concrete on top of them. And the main thing you're worried about is like wind loads. I don't know if they were talking about earthquake loads back then in New York City, because I believe you have to do that now, but you didn't then.
Yeah, probably not. I mean,
I think earthquake loads are basically the governing code everywhere now. But yeah, this is just to prevent the outside from moving independently of the inside.
Right. Yeah, which would be bad if that happens.
Quite bad.
Yes. So in 1973, they finished the buildings. A bunch of tenants move in. They're the tallest building in the world. They're the buildings with the most floors in the world. Tube construction was proven, which meant a lot of other buildings were built with this form of construction. Citicorp Center, which we'll talk about later, the Sears Tower, and nothing bad happened.
No. Famously.
Yeah. Yes. This is where Alice takes us on.
That's right. Welcome to my short explainer about how nothing bad happens. So, if you listen to our episode about the Salang Tunnel fire, we talk about how the Soviet Union invaded Afghanistan. This has been widely held to be a very bad move, not least because as part of the psycho Reagan doctrine anti-communism, the US and the US's friends in Pakistan and Israel and so on trained, armed, and funded a mixture of Afghan and foreign, mostly Saudi, Islamist fighters to fight the communists. And the good news is...
Put a pin in that,
Yeah, put a pin in that. Running out of pins. The good news is, depending. The good news is they win. Next slide, please.
How the buildings fell down. You ran out of pins.
Put another pin in this guy.
They will always be a grateful ally.
In this article from I think 1991, anti-Soviet warrior puts his army on the road to peace.
Oh, Robert Fisk, he's still out there.
Yeah, still writing. So after they win, some of them go on to form the Taliban government of Afghanistan. Others of them, like this guy, are just kind of wandering. Thus this article about how this cool guy who never worked for the CIA or anything of that nature is now building roads in Sudan, and he has put his army on the road to peace, and he's doing humanitarian work.
I brought him into the family business.
Yeah, they send us up to the Bronx. We're gonna build these residential towers. Yeah. Bin Laden did Co-op City. Yeah.
Sadio Bin Laden Group.
Three more
terrorism here.
3 more bad things happen. In order, Russia, post-USSR Russia, invades Chechnya. Serbians kill a bunch of Muslims in Bosnia, and then lastly, George H.W. Bush invades Iraq, which requires stationing US troops in Saudi Arabia, which a Saudi Arabian Islamist like Osama bin Laden could get very upset about. And all in all, it becomes very easy for guys like this who have been found themselves in this world of jihadism, I suppose, to then sell this idea that the West, right, including Russia, but also the US, is at war with Islam. And this leads to the foundation of Al-Qaeda. And what Al-Qaeda start doing is blowing up American stuff abroad. Embassies, the USS Cole, which I think kills 6 sailors. Next slide, please.
He's basically doing falling down.
Yeah, a disgruntled former US contractor.
I don't know what's funnier, is imagining Michael Douglas dressed like Bin Laden or Bin Laden dressed like
Please Photoshop that and send it to us on Twitter. Either way, preferably both. So then the terrorist attack happens, but not that terrorist attack. In 1993, an I think Egyptian guy called Ramzi Youssef figures out, hey, there's a vulnerability in these Twin Towers. You can just drive into the parking garage under here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to fill a van with explosives, park it next to a column, and set it off. And hopefully what's going to happen is one of these towers is going to collapse, fall into the other tower. They both come down. A huge win for Jihad. This does not happen. You can see a little diagram here on the left-hand side of what does happen, which is essentially he blows a big goddamn hole in 3 or 4 floors of the parking garage, kills like 6 people.
Yep.
But there's a few more details to put pins in, so I hope you have pins ready.
Well, I would say real fast.
I was plucking them out of the towers, actually.
Also, Ramzi Youssef was, I believe, Khalid Sheikh Mohammed's nephew. Khalid Sheikh Mohammed is one of the architects of the 9/11 attacks, and he is still sitting on Guantanamo Bay, and we're never going to try him because we were a broken and diseased country.
Yep.
And also, I would say, too, you can critique this plan, this 1993 plan, but the guy in question was named the Blind Sheikh. So he might not have been the best planner of this operation.
No, perhaps not. Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, by the way, waterboarded 273 times by the CIA.
That seems a bit excessive.
272 more than Christopher Hitchens.
I was about to say, like, I don't know. Maybe if they had done it 3 more times, he might have confessed.
Take 3 more pins. Pin number 1. It's very difficult to evacuate the towers because when Ramzi Youssef's bomb goes off in the parking garage, smoke just goes straight up that core. It chokes the entire lobby. It floods up the core through the elevator shafts. And so people are trying to evacuate through this. The firefighters have to break out windows so that the smoke can get out.
They just built 2 giant chimneys.
Yeah. That's 1 pin. Second pin, you'll notice on level B1, there's the Port Authority Control Center. That gets destroyed, which means the Port Authority's like communications infrastructure for telling people to evacuate and stuff, instantly destroyed. And pin 3, when they get there, the New York Fire Department put their command post right outside the lobby of the North Tower. And you can see on the right here, the photo of the street outside covered in emergency vehicles. Apart from that, nothing bad is going to happen.
Can't help but admire the RTS bus right here.
He also tried to assassinate the Pope, didn't he?
Yeah, there's a lot of weird stuff like that. A lot of like cockamamie schemes that kind of didn't go anywhere.
They were a bunch of loser jerk-offs, right? Like
That's true. Yeah.
One heroic battle in fucking Afghanistan, and then they're like, we're out of work. What do we do? And they just,
How do you try to assassinate the Pope, but then get away with it to an extent that you failed, but are still able to do further terrorism?
Huge L for the Swiss Guards.
He got arrested. He got arrested, I believe, in 95, maybe in Pakistan. And now he's serving 2 consecutive life sentences in Supermax. So he didn't do it that good.
Hey, but at least he didn't get waterboarded that we know of.
So did he try? How far did he get to assassinating the Pope before he was later able to do this?
Okay, my God. What was after the Iranian shrine bombing? You know what? You do that. This was supposed to be.
You're asking me, the Catholic on this podcast, to assassinate the Pope.
Hey, you don't own Catholicism, buddy. You do not own Catholicism.
I'm telling you that he tried to assassinate the Pope.
Guys, we're fighting amongst ourselves, okay?
Yeah,
Usually
let's go on the next slides.
He was going to be a suicide bomber dressed as a priest.
Jesus.
Oh,
apparently that
Fuck off. That's not real.
According to Wikipedia, Phase 1, Pope assassination plot. It is.
Fucking clown shoes. Okay, so this is a memo. It's called the President's Daily Briefing. The CIA collates it. They give it to the president every day. This one is highlighted, and it's declassified now due to public interest because it's headlined, Bin Laden determined to strike inside US. And what this tells you is the president at the time, George W. Bush, meant to have read this, probably never did, that Bin Laden wanted to follow the example of World Trade Center bomber Ramzi Youssef and bring the fighting to America. And you have your like cause and effect quite neatly here, because after US missile strikes on his base in Afghanistan in 1998, Bin Laden told followers he wanted to retaliate in Washington. And so the
went
CIA...
over, buddy. He went over, buddy.
So the CIA already kind of know that Bin Laden wants to do this, but they don't want to share information with the FBI. The FBI don't want to share information with the FBI. The NSA don't want to share information with the FBI. And so, like, basically...
None of them are snitches. The CIA and the NSA aren't snitches. They're not going to go to the feds like that.
Yeah, ACAB. I guess the lesson here is that, like, FBI agents are incredibly unpopular and no one likes them, because you end up with all of these memos flying back and forth between FBI agents that are like, hey, we know all of these Al-Qaeda guys are in the US and have, like, multiple entry visas, and some of them are at this flight school. Should we do something about that? And then they just get things back like, nah.
Probably fine.
Feds, baby.
Yeah.
What could happen? Yeah, but who would want to hang out with an FBI? They're all Mormon. They don't even fucking drink. They never let down. They're no fun, man. I wouldn't snitch out if I was in the CIA, which I'm not.
He said, not quite convincingly.
Yeah, so this is how you get the like 9/11 conspiracy theories that like are not Bush did 9/11, but Bush allowed 9/11 to happen. Is that like it seems so implausible that you could have all of these like kind of near misses where the FBI are like, could we do that? And it's like, no, if you think that's
a bunch of incompetent jackass,
if you think that that's an implausible level of incompetence for the federal government to display, I would ask you, have you seen anything the federal government has done in the last 20 years?
It's a good point.
Never attribute to malice what can adequately be explained by incompetence.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like that's the fundamental tenet of Marxism.
Yeah. So that's me. That's my little like potted explanation of how 9/11. And of course, we know what happened on 9/11. Apart from, unless you're in our audience are Zoomers, in which case you may not. So I guess
building, blow up, go boom.
Yeah. 19 of Bin Laden's guys fly one airliner into the North Tower. Then, like an hour later, they fly another one into the South Tower. A lot of people get killed. A lot of people get trapped above the impact site because the plane like severs all or all but one of the stairwells in the core. Those people are just fucked. And you get like really grim photos of people hanging out of windows and like 911 calls. People jump out, people fall. Grimmest thing, one of them lands on a firefighter and kills him.
Then they whacked a plane into the Pentagon.
Yep.
And then Amy McGrath shot down Flight 93.
Yeah, that's right. I was gonna talk a little bit about the actual emergency response, because that's a disaster in and of itself. So as with last time, the fire department just sets up a command post in the lobby of the North Tower, and you can see it there on the top left. The Port Authority announcement system that was in the basement, it does not get blown up this time, so that's working. And they get on the radio and they say, "Okay, everybody, just stay where you are. We know how much of an effort it was, how chaotic it was to evacuate last time. It's safest to keep everybody where they are, and you fight the fire." It's shades of Grenfell, right? In fact, a lot of people in the South Tower come down to ground level when the first plane hits the North Tower, and people tell them to go back up. Some of them do, some of them don't.
Oh my God. It's just the worst instruction I can think of. Like,
yeah,
but I can also see why people would do it.
Mm-hmm. They don't know what the fuck to do if the building you're currently standing in has just been hit by a plane.
No,
that's fair.
I'd like to think I would do the right thing and just walk the fuck out and go home. But, you know, it's capitalism. You know, you have a job back up there. Oh, the people down, the security down there, the firefighters, the cops are saying it's safe. Go back to work. Okay. I'll go back and count some more. I'll do more counting.
That fire is like 40 stories above me. I don't care.
Like I remember reading one survivor talking about how like he gets down to the lobby and a Port Authority guy with a bullhorn like yells in his face to go back up, and he's like, I don't know how I didn't punch the guy, but I just walked past him because what was he going to do? Arrest me? So some people do. Also of note is I want to talk about radios a little bit, because at this time,
about how Giuliani fucked up the radios with the bidding contracts. I'm assuming that's what you're going to say right now, right?
That's exactly what I'm going to say.
Thank you. Famous story in New York. People talk about this all the time. Like we had.
I thought Giuliani loved America. I was told that Giuliani loved America.
Right? Yeah. Noun, verb, 9/11. Yeah.
Come to New York City and talk to people here, both before and after 9/11, and see how much fucking people love Giuliani. Piece of shit mayor, and he screwed the pooch on this one.
There's actually two bad Giuliani decisions.
I feel like if I say Rudy Giuliani loves America anywhere in New York, I'm gonna get laid out, and I'm gonna deserve it.
Yeah, don't say it at the Patriot bar, man. Just don't say it.
So there's actually two Rudy Giuliani horrible 9/11 decisions. One is the radios. One is like basing pretty much all of the like New York City's emergency operations center in Building 7. Like directly across, along with a bunch of like incredibly hazardous chemicals for some fucking reason. Like he was a Batman villain. But yeah, anyway, radios. So because of shitty low bidding, the FDNY and the NYPD and the Port Authority Police all have separate radio systems. They can't interact with each other. They can't talk to each other. NYPD and Port Authority have UHF, ultra high frequency radios, which work quite well in buildings. The fire department has VHF, very high frequency, which don't.
Weird Al Yankovic, we know.
Yeah, and there is a Port Authority repeater in the building that like you use to like increase that signal strength. Nobody quite knows how to operate it. It sort of works. It kind of works. And so you have this incredibly chaotic thing where people are coming down, people are coming back up. You have firefighters trying to go up the stairwell. There's a picture of that on the right-hand side. That guy, Mike Kehoe, survived, by the way. And as they're doing this, their radios don't work. And so when the second plane hits the South Tower, the FDNY orders an evacuation, and none of the firefighters up there can hear it. And so
Jesus fuck.
Kills 343 firefighters, one guy from the fire patrol who you can see there in the red helmets, a fire marshal also, a bunch of cops, but at least like they had some warning, whereas like the firefighters absolutely did not.
Jesus.
And as ever, like there's all of the dispatchers instantly overwhelmed with 911 calls and radio communications. The like in-cab terminals that you have now, those were new at the time, and they just kind of stopped working. And so if you were an FDNY commander and you wanted to know like what units you had available to you, the dispatcher would have to read that out to you, and that would take like 5-10 minutes of just uninterrupted airtime. Everybody's talking over each other because the handful of channels are overcrowded. And of course, you still have, as you see in that diagram on the bottom right, everybody's just parked right outside because that was how you staged things. And so you just end up with this.
That ACAB, but also AFAW, all firefighters are wonderful. It's heartbreaking to hear this story because firefighters do nothing but good. They're like a municipal service that does nothing but help people. There's like good people out there to help you out and get you safe and put out the fire. Good people.
Yeah. Like I've done a lot of shit in my life, but like again with firefighters, it's just as simple as like I will never have the fucking balls to like run into a burning building with my radio not fucking working. I'll just be like, yep, this is a Tuesday. Like this shit blows ass.
Yeah, catch me running in the opposite direction and not wanting to be a firefighter anymore.
I am, in fact, a pussy bitch baby.
That's why AFA, all firefighters are wonderful.
That's right. So this of course sets up for like a massive disaster in the emergency response, and it's why the death toll is as high as it is. I don't know if there's like lessons you can learn from this aside from fucking evacuate a building when a plane hits it.
Yes.
because it's not something that you can really like prepare for. You can't say, oh, the fire department didn't have enough radios, because like they were never going to. You can't keep that many on hand just in case 9/11 happens.
There's a certain inertia too. Like you keep coming back to, you keep putting a pin in these plans. What happened in 1993 and what happens in at 9/11, and it seems like the mists of time. Like it seems like forever ago. But if you were there, it was only 8 years apart, right? Like you had this plan then, and we have this plan now, and it wasn't that far apart from one another. So
well, like somebody. I remember the port authority guy said at the time, like he was telling people to stay put over the announcement thing, and the phrase was like, I'm going to keep doing this until I get authority not to from the fire department or somebody. And of course, the fire department kind of busy at the moment, and so
putting out,
just
the fire.
Yeah, just don't get that.
And there's also like a lot of precedent for tall buildings not falling down.
Right.
At this point, you know, I mean, even ones where they really thought it was going to, like One Meridian Plaza in Philadelphia, they were like, oh, this building's definitely coming down. And they evacuated most of Center City because they thought it was going to come down. And like finally the fire got high enough that it hit a floor that had sprinklers on it, tamped the fire down.
Can I, Alice, are you done with the part where Giuliani puts the staging in Building 7 and the city stuff? Or
this is me done with my slide here. So like yes. I figure if we all have anything else to contribute about the actual like day of, this is kind of where it belongs.
If I could, like, and I think that was a good presentation.
Thank you.
We have to get back to the political economy of it, right? Because we're talking about the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey, this like mongrel, disgusting public-private entity with a ton of money and a ton of power that kind of exists outside the structure of the city and the state, both states, but kind of lives in it at the same time, has the ability to create all these hundreds of millions of square feet of office space, even when it's needed or not. Like there's a whole like economic world that's existing here. And part of the reason, as I understand it, and again, like I'm a New Yorker and like people still talk about this, the reason why Giuliani ends up putting all those essential services in the World Trade Center complex is because the World Trade Center from the fucking from the 1970s with the fiscal crisis and all the way up to the time when 9/11 happens was an unmitigated fucking disaster. It was a boondoggle. They never leased out all that fucking space. So what do? You get another government agency to lease out the space to bail out the Port Authority to try to get private people to come in and lease it, but they don't. So you bring another public entity in there and you just keep like filling this thing as much as you possibly can to make sure it doesn't lose all the fucking money.
That's also incidentally why you see this in like conspiracy theories, which we'll talk about in a second, but like they'll be like, oh, why did the FBI and the CIA and the NSA have an office in the World Trade Center? Yeah, because they were bailing them out, because you can always get money by like having the feds be tenants in your building, and that's what was happening.
If the buildings were still up, they'd have the DSA as a tenant by now.
Oh yeah, big time. They're half feds, yeah.
I'm sorry.
I shouldn't even agree with you on that one. You guys mind if I take a break and use the bathroom real fast?
No, go for it.
Yeah, go ahead.
Go for it.
All right. Got some drums there.
Hey guys. Hey, my roommate just got back from a few months away because of COVID, and he informs me that a woman named Ruth Bader Ginsburg died an hour.
Yeah, you hear about that? Our very own 9/11 on the 9/11 episode.
She
sucks so bad.
She died on Rosh Hashanah, which, if you need any further proof that God hates the Jews,
yeah. How's that year going for you?
It's we're starting off real good, dude. I like don't really I don't want to get into it too much because I don't want to deal with the snarky bullshit. Ruth Bader Ginsburg should have retired because that's not really here nor there right now.
Yeah,
but just absolutely fuck Mitch McConnell. Absolutely fuck this whole thing, man. Like
fuck everything. Fuck it all.
Yeah, that's how I feel, man. I just, like I said, I'm not doing the blame I'm not getting into the blaming her for her own death bullshit right now. But I just
kind of can though.
Yeah, I might. I might indulge myself.
Listen, I will say, and I don't want to even speak these words, but like, if you live in a state where there's a Senate race and you can vote for someone who's not like a literal baby eating monster, please do that. I don't really give a fuck about the vote for president, but like, please, like, at least in the Senate, like,
this is really early. It just happened, but isn't Mitch McConnell just going to jam this through the Senate?
Like in the statement acknowledging her death, he also basically turned right around and was just like, "But we're going to nominate our person."
And the Democrats won't filibuster because they're fucking cowards.
Yeah, and it's going to be some slavering dog fucking psycho.
You know who's going to have to save us? Mitt fucking Romney. He's going to have to take one for the team. You don't want to see that, Alice. You don't want to see Mitt fucking Romney stabbing Mitch McConnell on the floor of the Senate with some sword he got from his dad in like its 70s Detroit flea market. You don't want to see that? Yes, you do.
If there's one thing sentiment I share with some of the protagonists of our story, fuck America, man. What not in the way that they said it, but just like, what a fucking unmitigated disaster.
Bernie Sanders is the only senator I know of who has a sword.
There's got to be more than that.
I believe there's some wackadoodles in Congress that I imagine have swords.
There's going to be QAnon senators soon, so I'm sure they'll have.
Oh my god! We have a QAnon senator before we get like the social democratic one. Oh my god!
I am so tired of the QAnon people, man. I'm just like, why do you believe that these are competent as they are?
I'm doing a QAnon episode with Matt Christman next week. It's going to be great. It's
going to be fun.
I'm sure he's going to take this news extremely well, and with the equilibrium we know him for.
I just saw his girlfriend. She was going over to his house, and I feel a little bad for her. She's going to hear it.
What just happened? I didn't understand the last discussion we had. Showed up.
Ruth Bader Ginsburg died. Well, Roz has become the Joker, ladies and gentlemen.
What the fuck together, man?
Just screaming at
the goddamn Joker.
I'm sorry.
Welcome back, baby. Oh well.
This is gonna get ran through in like 2 days.
Yeah. Oh man.
Do you remember that like a few weeks ago she officiated a wedding and like they posted it on Twitter and they were like, hey, no, guess who officiated our wedding? Nobody's wearing a mask, but don't worry, we all got tested. I'm grinning and giving a double thumbs up into the microphone right now.
COVID got her? Holy shit. Oh man. Ugh.
Wedding influencers have just perpetrated a greater act of terrorism on the United States than Al Qaeda.
That was hell of a hell of a bathroom break I took that I missed that.
My roommate came in. He just got back from COVID quarantine, and he told me about that. It was that's quite interesting. It really puts a new shine on this whole electoral contest here.
Oh man, it's gonna be really funny when they ram someone through before the election.
Yeah, I know. But you know how good this is for content, because you can use that break as a break and do part 2. And then part 2 will us basically be doing a cold open of when we found out that Ruth Bader Ginsburg died. That's great.
Yes, that's a really good idea.
Yeah.
Really good content.
So, anyway, with that news that the notorious RBG is dead.
God, don't even.
So, we all know Bush put bombs in the towers, right?
Mm-hmm.
Twirling his mustache, bringing up big crates marked Acme in the service elevator, right?
Yep.
Just the one service elevator. The rest of it has to be for other shit. The designated bomb service elevator.
There's usually like one service. I don't know. I've been up the main tall building I've been up is the BNY Mellon Center in Philly. They only had one service elevator. And it was slow as hell.
How many items of nanothermite do you think you could have brought up with you?
I was big. I could have brought a shitload of nanothermite, but I couldn't have concealed that I was doing it because they have a guy sitting on a crate who pushes the button for you.
The nanothermite checker. He just checks to make sure you don't have nanothermite.
No, I think he just has a really good union and he's the elevator operator still.
SCIU elevator operator. Hell yeah.
Yeah. We're going to talk about how these towers came down. And then we'll talk a little bit about the conspiracy theories around it, controlled demolition theory, right? And I've worked on controlled demolitions. Well, a controlled demolition.
Yeah, 9/11.
Rosniak did not.
It was the Poles. List of suspects.
The Poles did it.
Do you know Poles went to work that day?
Put a pin in this podcast.
Implying the Poles have jobs regardless.
All right. Terrorists whacked 2 big planes into the buildings, and for some reason, a lot of folks think that isn't enough to bring a building down, and instead, Bush called up the Acme Company and put the bombs in the buildings. So we're going to talk about thermite. We're going to talk about squibs. We'll talk about the explosions in the lobby and the basement. We'll talk a little bit about Building 7. I don't know if we can talk too much about it just because of time constraints. But first, we're going to talk about the official explanation for the collapse, which I think is basically correct. And I want to say this. We planned this episode before TrueAnon World Trade Bush did 9/11 episode 3 came out. We're not doing this in response to that. I don't want to start a podcast beef.
Still though.
That being said, I learned most of this from that episode, and it's not very convincing.
I'd also like to note the kind of wild card I'll just be floating over all of the content here was what I presented earlier, which is that construction in the late 60s, early 1970s maybe wasn't up to the codes that were demanded. Maybe the as-builts looked a little fucked up. So something to think about moving forward.
I have some pictures of that, actually.
Yeah, good man.
So a plane whacked into one of the World Trade Center towers, right? And you can sort of see, looks like a lot of columns.
Plane-shaped hole.
Yeah, it's a plane-shaped hole.
Real like Acme, like Looney Tunes shit. You have like a plane-shaped impact hole.
Yeah, you get the fuselage, you got the wings. You can see as the wings get thinner, less stuff is impacted, right? It's ripped the cladding off, right? It severed some of the columns. Certainly right here is like 2 or 3 floors of columns just gone, right? These are a few diagrams I found of estimated damage caused by the impacts, right? And this is in Tower 1, the North Tower, and Tower 2, the South Tower, respectively. So one of the things you can sort of see here is that the impact did a lot of damage. This is mostly showing what happened to the core. A lot of the core columns were just whacked, just gone by, the plane ramming into the building.
These are prefabricated sections. We saw those 3-story sections that are being flown in and then put in place and then welded together. So in terms of like a column coming apart, it could simply just be a weld breaking.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's why you can't be like jet fuel can't melt steel beams. It's like can destroy steel beams is like a plane.
Yes.
Or paper burning really hot. Because as it turns out, in 2001, there's a lot of paper.
Yes. Plastic computers.
As a welder, I would be happy to stand my beads up to anybody. But if you flew like really fast and like really hard steel and aluminum into my welds, I'm not sure they would hold. I don't know.
Fair enough.
As someone who's welded at some point in my life and was never very good at it, you'd definitely fly a plane into my welds.
That's the new American Welding Society certification is, can you fly a plane into the weld? Yeah, I got my AWS.
All right. Once this plane whacks into the building, right, it causes a lot of fire. It severs some columns. And since we're severing the columns, we need to start thinking about the load path through the building, right? And you can see here, we have another view of the hat truss. We're looking along a different chord. That's why it looks different, right? So
yeah, kind of a more sombrero vibe this time.
Yeah, exactly. We've gone from sort of trilby to sombrero.
Different phases, different hipsters doing different styles, different eras.
Once the plane hits the building, it cuts through the exterior columns. A couple things happen. Number one, it sets the building on fire a lot. There's a lot of fire, right? The jet fuel burned up really quickly. Office supplies and shit kept burning, right? It stripped off the fireproofing. That's something we will talk about in the next slide more extensively. And your exterior columns are hollow tubes, so the fire can get inside, right? It severs the pipes in the core, which lead to the sprinkler systems, right? And also all the other pipes. So, if you shat yourself when you were in an upper story and you needed to use the bathroom, the toilet's not going to refill.
That's not so good.
I know, right?
I love that your scenario is just if you shat yourself.
I would.
This is the Virgil, Texas guide to 9/11.
Yeah, first of all, I'm in 9/11, and second of all, I've got IBS. Why would I not?
Yeah.
I'm sorry about your stomach, Alice.
Thank you.
I didn't.
But number 4, it changes the load path of these columns, right? So there's these exterior columns. They're taking the weight from these floors here, right? And originally they would transfer the load down, right? Now they're cut in half. So the lower part still transferring the load down. The upper part is transferring the load up to the hat truss. The hat truss brings it across into the core columns, which bring them down.
It's fine. The hat truss is strong. It's fine.
In addition to this, a whole bunch of the core columns have been severed. Right? So, although they're much thicker, much stronger, they are also now being subjected to much, much higher loading than they are designed for. Now, you have a very strong safety factor on these things. You have a very strong safety factor on all of these things. And of course, if there was one thing these exterior columns had, it was redundancy. Right. You can see just how many columns there are on every side. I think there's
18 inches, you said. That's a lot of column.
Yeah, especially when there's 1 acre of floor space on every floor. Right. But again, there's a lot of fire. Right. And it's hot initially. It gets hotter with paper. It starts to cool down later on. We'll talk about that in a second. And there's a few recordings which, taken out of context, say firefighters thought they could knock down the fires with 1 or 2 lines. And that was referring to some of the lower areas of the fire, not like the main areas of the fire where
they're working their way up.
There was a lot of fire. So now we have to talk about the fireproofing system. All right. And this is where...
that good? Is that supposed to look that way?
Oh, boy. All right, so this came from, let me remember what it is, Fire Engineering Magazine. I think it was an article in...
Oh, which one? I get that every week.
I forget where it was. I will link to it in the description just to make... I got these images from there. Fireproofing is kind of relative, right? It's rated for however many hours of protection at whatever temperature if it's properly applied, right?
Mm-hmm. Our Co-op City people are taking the pin out of that right there.
Yeah.
Just moving these various pins around.
If the temperature of the fire is lower, it might last longer. If the temperature of the fire is higher, it might not last as long. This depends on chemical composition, what kind of fireproofing it is, right? So that's why you want fireproofing to be installed completely and adequately, standard, and there's standards and tests which exist now to ensure that fireproofing is applied properly.
Yeah, plus fewer large Italian men coming to your office to talk about the fireproofing contract.
Yes. Looks like shit on the right there, I just got to say. If that's actual, like, what it looked like, that looks like shit.
this is from inside the towers. It's not from one of the floors that was hit. But yeah.
It looks like shit.
It looks like shit.
Steel, that's garbage, man. Someone phone that in.
So the sort of tests we do today to ensure fireproofing is installed adequately didn't exist when World Trade Center 1 and World Trade Center 2 were put up.
Thank God it was the era of the working man.
Yeah.
No rebar, no fireproofing, simple as.
No problem.
There's barely any concrete in these buildings, so you didn't need rebar.
It's the future we all want.
World Trade Center 1 and 2 had 2 fireproofing systems. One was spray-on fireproofing. That was on the floor joists and most of the structural members. You can see the metal deck has spray-on fireproofing. You can see the floor joists here mostly have spray-on fireproofing. Well, some of it has spray. The upper cord has spray-on fireproofing. So
that's just an honest day's work right there.
It's fireproofed on average.
I would feel good about that going home at the end of the day.
I did it. I did a good job.
I'm just trying to. Yeah, the upper cord is the one in tension, and the lower cord. No, the lower cord is the one in tension. It needs the fireproofing more. Fuck. All right. Anyway, one was spray-on fireproofing. What we're seeing here are 2 parts of the building. On the left, actually, is a section of the core. And this had previously had spray-on fireproofing applied. This is a column, right? This is, I think, 3 or 4 stories tall.
You can see the weld up at the top too.
No.
What you're looking at here is this spray-on fireproofing. You can see where it's still applied, right? It adhered well to the surface of the column when it was put on, but the surface of the column was, it had been exposed to the elements for a while, so it rusted. They sprayed the fireproofing on the rust.
At the time they put the building up, that's what, 7 years?
No, this is 1992, and the building was built in, 73 or something like that? You're talking like 15, 16 years, something like that?
It sounds, I don't remember when it was, 68? 69, maybe?
It started in 68. I think it wasn't completed until like 70 or 72. So you're looking like, a decent amount of time. 20 years, maybe.
But they put the fireproofing on after the column had developed a layer of surface rust. So it just peeled off. At some point, the fireproofing just started flaking off on its own, right? And, this section, according to the article, was on the 78th floor. I'm not sure of which tower. And the author noted that this condition was still evident in June of 2000.
Not good.
And on the other side, we already talked about how this fireproofing is not well applied. And this is not necessarily the fireproofer's fault, because a lot of times fireproofing is applied last before other systems are installed, which makes applying fireproofing to joists like this very difficult. It's difficult to start out with because it's a complex, system of shapes, right?
Don't say Justin doesn't stand for the working man, okay?
No, I'm not.
So the buildings were also both built during the transition from asbestos fireproofing to newer non-asbestos fireproofing.
Another pin.
Yeah, which we were, when Trump says something incredibly stupid, which is also right.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. All the time, yeah.
Yeah, which
is when he said about the forest fires that they should rake the forests, but the reason why was that trees explode. He was right. Trees do explode in forest fires.
Yeah.
Okay.
And it was like, asbestos was something that we knew how to apply when these buildings were built. And then, we were looking for new non-asbestos fireproofings, which were ordered to be applied when these buildings were half built.
So this, similar to the political economy of it, it's kind of spanned 2 eras, like the asbestos era and the post-asbestos era.
Yeah, you have just enough asbestos in there as seasoning to make sure that everybody gets mesothelioma.
So I believe this is high enough that it's all gypsum based fireproofing, but it didn't adhere as well, and it was also just it was either not applied well or we didn't have good adhesives back then. I'm not sure exactly. I'm linking the article, which has more details. I just took these images to show that like this was representative of the amount of fireproofing inside the buildings. There was also a second form of fireproofing in the building, right? Mostly protecting the core. We saw how there was a hole through the core earlier, right? So the World Trade Centers did not have concrete cores like a modern building would. It was all steel, protected by spray-on fireproofing, but also you can see some panels here. And I believe that is a different kind of fireproofing. I'm not sure if that's exactly what it was, but I do know for a fact that the other thing that protected the cores was gypsum wallboard.
Good.
Classic choice.
Also known as drywall.
Mm-hmm.
Thus making the 9/11 hijackers the first Kyles to punch holes in drywall.
They were not the first Kyles. Plenty of people punched holes through drywall before 2001.
Yeah.
Let's say the deadliest Kyles.
That does mean World Trade Center 1 and 2 were Grover Tower.
I would watch The Deadliest Warrior, but only with Kyle's.
So, all right, drywall is actually pretty good fireproofing, right? It's that along with the spray-on gypsum waterproofing. Gypsum is about half water by weight. The way it works is there's water crystals in the structure, right? In the molecular structure. And as the fire burns the gypsum, the water vaporizes, becomes steam, right? And that keeps temperatures low enough because there's so much heat required to vaporize the water that you can get these good fireproofing ratings out of it, like 1 hour, 2 hour, 3 hour, right? But gypsum is bad with impacts.
Yes.
Back to the Kyles.
Yeah. So they kyled their way through the towers and basically negated the fireproofing.
I'll do it.
If anyone's ever dropped a piece of drywall when you're walking with it and the thing just goes bleh, and like crumbles, it's not the strongest with that sort of shear, right? It shears very easily off.
And I believe there's stronger versions of drywall with a bunch of glass fibers in them, which I assume is probably what they used, but they're probably not aircraft impact rated.
That's an impact rating they only brought on after 9/11.
Why don't they make the whole building out of the black box?
All right, so how does your whole bunch of fire translate to the building collapsing, right? And there's a few things that go on here with the floor plates, right? So step one is the impact happens, and that causes a hell of a lot of damages to the building, right? The fire is kind of gravy on this. The impact did most of the damage. It kyles its way through the drywall, starts a big fire. The floor trusses start to sag from the heat, right? And the fire is interesting because it starts out kind of cool from jet fuel, right? And then it gets hotter from paper and shit, right? And then it starts to cool off, right? After the floor trusses start bending, right? And once the fire starts to cool off, the floor trusses start to contract and they pull the exterior columns in with them as they do. Right. So that causes these columns to buckle, and that reduces the amount of load they can carry. In addition, with all these core columns being exposed to unrestricted flame and many of them being severed, right? So you can see this. Here's a series of lines imposed, or what's the word I'm looking for? Not imposed. Superimposed. Yes.
Imposed, but better.
Yes, exactly. Over, where you would expect the columns of the World Trade Center to be, right? And you can see one of them right here, and you can see how these actual columns are bending inwards and then back outwards, right? And you can sort of see that here as well, right?
They're vertically buckling.
Yeah, and this is a subtle bending, but it's very significant, right? These columns have been turned into the equivalent of wet noodles, and also several of them have been severed. So, in the meantime, right, these are events leading up to the collapse, not the actual collapse. Under, the intense implied heat, the remaining intact parts of the building start to twist, writhe under these incredible forces they're being put over. And your load distribution over the whole towers becomes eccentric. Lateral loads are introduced into structural columns designed only for vertical loads. They're being pushed and pulled, and generally they're not having a good time, right?
Can I say real quick?
Yeah.
In addition to a welder, although welding, works for this too, I also use the oxyacetylene blowtorch a lot. And you'd be surprised by what a giant, heavy steel H-beam will do under heat. Like, it will twist, it will turn. When you're putting that much heat on it, the thing no longer stays structurally as it's supposed to be. I've seen that in real life.
Yeah, I mean, she just goes. Oh, crap. I wasn't supposed to switch the slide. And so at some point, a few structural members go, one floor collapses into the one under it, and the top half of the building starts coming down, right? Each successive floor pancakes down out of the next one, and those floors aren't able to put up a lot of resistance to,
No, they're just like a few
14.
inches of concrete.
Yeah, exactly. A few inches of concrete, some shitty floor trusses. Not much resistance.
Bunch of stockbrokers. There's not a lot of resistance that like a stockbroker has to compression is the thing.
I'm sure
they should have got load-bearing stockbrokers.
And the falling mass increases with each floor, right? The columns and trusses, of course, the columns themselves are misaligned at this point, so the columns are not really putting up any resistance. They're unable to effectively impede the mass of the building. It's just 100 PSF floor trusses which are resisting this whole building coming down. At its fastest, one floor was collapsing into the next within 1/10 of a second. And one thing is, I just want to explain these. These are computer simulations here. These are done by something called finite element analysis. What you're looking at here is using something called exaggerated deformation, right? When you do these sorts of computer simulations to illustrate what is happening, usually the deformation is subtle enough that you can't effectively display it graphically without exaggerating it significantly, right? So
yeah, it's difficult enough to see with the superimposed lines.
Yeah, like these things might fail, when it's just out of alignment by a couple inches. So
but the twisting and the deformation is real.
Yes.
That's really happening with all those.
Yeah, so, when it's a couple floors doing this, even if it doesn't look exactly like this, it's still pretty bad.
Yeah, and also it's fast enough that it's like only possible to reconstruct that it's like floors pancaking in on each other, like from slowing down the footage a lot or from first principles, right? Like to anybody watching, it just looks like the whole thing comes down at once.
Yeah, and another thing
almost
is
as if someone had staged a series of explosives around each floor and so on and so on.
No spoilers, dude.
Yeah. Another thing is, like, a lot of people say this building was designed to withstand the impact of a 707, which the engineers said it was.
Engineers would never exaggerate.
Here's the thing. No. They did not have analytical methods to determine what that impact would be in the 1960s.
No, it's like Liam saying that, like, he could fight Sean McElwee. Like, he doesn't actually have an empirical basis for that. It's just something he's pretty confident about.
I do a simulation of Liam fighting Sean McElwee.
I can do it.
You have to like exaggerate both Liam and Sean in order to like analyze this.
We're both supposedly 6'2". Like he's I'm sure got tiny little baby hands.
Like, there's so many variables there. Like, maybe they were thinking like a 707, but it was on approach to an airport, so it was going slower. And they also would have been like, okay, this is a point load applied to one part of the building. We have to consider
also
that.
probably not like full of fuel.
Mhm.
Also, like airliners did get heavier. Is the
Yes.
thing.
So this building could withstand a 707 impacting it, assuming the 707 was spherical with a uniformly distributed mass.
Assuming a perfectly circular hijacker.
Yes. All right. So when these buildings came down, it was the floors that went first, right? And we can sort of see this through how it collapsed, right?
It goes in a wave, right? It goes top down, and then part way up, it starts going bottom up too.
Yeah.
Well, okay, yes. So the top comes down, but it's mainly the floors doing the work, right? Which is why you see very large pieces of facade largely intact that landed around the site, right? And you can also see pieces of facade which were in free fall well past, the actual front of the collapse. Because the floors impacted themselves. The facade stayed intact because it was the main structural part until the top part of the building came down and sheared them off, right? And actually, the core stayed intact of at least one of these buildings, like 25 seconds after the floors had all collapsed.
Oh, wow.
I would throw some video in here, but I've given up on putting video on these because we keep getting copyright strikes.
I'll tell you, I don't need to see video of it again, to be quite honest.
And also, YouTube watchers are very rational, reasonable people. They can just imagine this happening, and they'll agree with this assessment of it.
Yeah.
Yes.
So just visualize 9/11.
Yes.
Go to 9/11 in your mind.
Go to whatever the opposite of a happy place is.
So these buildings
Are
collapse.
you done visualizing 9/11? Good. Let's move on.
These buildings collapse from the inside out. Now we have to talk about conspiracies, right?
Mm-hmm.
We're not a conspiracy podcast. I don't like conspiracies. I think they're counterproductive to
psychologically.
Yeah.
Psychologically, they're a way of explaining how something like how an atrocity
actually,
except
happens.
Gladio, which is true.
Yes. That's true. Every conspiracy theory about Italy is true, but 9/11 did not happen in Italy. Conspiracy theory is just a way of explaining how something that profoundly affects your life and like has a lot of meaning can't just be random. JFK can't just get shot by some guy. It has to be the mob and the CIA and so on and so on and so on. And so like 19 assholes can't just murder 3,000 people and like change the entire course of history. It has to be the feds or Mossad or whatever.
I'm personally, I'm an agnostic on a lot of conspiracy theories, but I think we always need to be careful. So I think that, true things like Gladio do exist. We always have to be careful to attribute things to agency that we should be attributing them to structures.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, well, what's the materialist explanation for 9/11? It's, the Reagan doctrine, and then the fall of the Soviet Union, and just arming and funding whoever. Like, that's the conspiracy, right? It's like that was an illicit series of acts. It's like, that's not something you need to theorize.
I am fine with saying Bush did 9/11, to be honest. I'm fine with that. But the materialist and structural explanations we're going to get through here, but in a literal sense, not in a structure in terms of like economic structure or whatever.
But Bush himself, either of them, did not like go there with a hatchet and start knocking down beams.
But Dick Cheney didn't take the Flight 93 passengers off the jet that landed in Kansas or whatever and just shoot them one by one personally.
They weren't secret missiles
Amy
disguised
McGrath
as jets.
shot down Flight 93.
Right. Amy McGrath did it, and Dick Cheney is part of an entire systemic looting and destruction of human life and society anyways that comes out of being the vice president of the United States. You don't need him to be personally executing people on the runway in order for him to be in some way complicit in 9/11.
Yes.
Pretty gruesomely evil. Yeah, exactly.
That'd be pretty funny if he did, though. He stole one of their hearts.
Well, we know Dick Cheney didn't kill any of the victims of 9/11 because he didn't demand that they apologize to him like that friend of his he shot.
Let me tell you about controlled demolition, right?
Speak your truth, Justin.
This is all right. So controlled demolition is like the big 9/11 conspiracy theory. Bush put bombs in the towers or whatever, right? While he was twirling his mustache and bringing up big crates of Acme sticks of dynamites, right? So there's a few specious pieces of evidence which support this, which we'll get into, but let's talk about how controlled demolition works. Controlled demolition, a lot of times people say this is a building implosion, right? But it's not. It's not an implosion. There's a small set of shaped charges, right? They're made out of high velocity explosives. They cut critical structural members, which usually means almost all the structural members. And gravity does the rest of the work, right? Usually
it's actually what Ramzi Youssef was trying to do, just not successfully.
Yeah. Usually used, well, he would have used multiple truck bombs if he wanted to make it work.
Not to give him tips or anything while he's in Supermax, but
he's not exactly about to take down the World Trade Centers. Someone else did that.
Mission accomplished, if you will.
So usually you're using plasticized explosives, right? RDX, C4, the plastic explosive, stuff like that. That lets you shape.
You mean that stuff that's easy to detect?
Yes. So it lets you use less explosive overall. It lets you shape the charges. It lets you produce less noise, which is very important, right? Your high velocity explosives produce those very sharp, short booms, right? As opposed to, a bomb, which would do a big, loud kaboom.
Right.
Like the Beirut explosion.
Yeah. Which would then shatter windows, cause widespread damage, so on and so forth, right? Because you want to prevent damage in adjacent buildings. You want gravity to do the work, so most of the blasting happens at lower floors, right? Sometimes you might do blasting on upper floors if you need to bring down the building in a certain pattern, if there's a confined space, which, there usually is. But of course, World Trade Centers came down in an extremely sloppy fashion, so you would think they would do the blasting at the lower floors, right? This is a picture of the Queen Lane apartments. This is a controlled demolition I worked on.
Well, congrats, Mazel Tov. Shana Tova.
Yes, it was me. I tore down public housing. So you can sort of see here's part of the buildings coming down here, right? Because they took down the columns here. And usually you bring it down sort of one set of columns at a time. That way the building starts to sort of lean into itself, and that helps it fall into its own footprint, right?
Right.
Now your prep work is a lot of times very long, extensive, and complex, right? And it was, you remove facade materials, remove all the windows, right? You strip the building down as much as possible so you know absolutely what it'll do when you blow it up, right? You apply the charges. A lot of times there's a bunch of protective like tarps you put around the explosives in order to ensure that like the explosion only happens on the column.
Yeah.
And it doesn't
Crucially, you want to remove the like brokerage firms and like arbitrage offices. Those kind of get in the way of your explosives and the tarps and things of that nature.
You want to get all the job liquidation assets out of there.
Ideally, you blow up the building when there's no one in there.
I like ideally, like sometimes you've just got it. One guy hasn't moved. And you're like, fuck it. We said 9 a.m. We meant 9 a.m.
All right.
Hey, listen, there's a whistle, there's a horn. Yeah, at some point it's on you.
He's got one of those 19th century boxes like from the cartoons you press down on.
When I worked on this project, I was put in charge of like, I guess basically doing a lot of public outreach on this, which involved, I worked for PHA at the time. I didn't work for Controlled Demolition. Controlled Demolition did the demolition, right? My job was to like, do a bunch of maps showing where the, where people shouldn't be, and where you were going to inhale a lot of dust if you were nearby. Then there were some groups who were charged with like trying to persuade residents to evacuate around the demolition, determine who could not evacuate. And then there was this third group, which was like, you can evacuate. And what we're going to do is we're going to bring around a judge who will issue a writ of eviction on site. So the police can come take you out of your house and put you away for an hour and a half while we demolish this building.
Congratulations, Roz. This is your fault.
Listen, I was not around when the building actually came down.
Way to pass that blame, buddy.
Yeah.
These demolitions, like, there's a lot of weird stuff that happens around them. You know, it's like literally you had to evict residents in the surrounding blocks, just so no one would get hit with debris, which might happen. Didn't happen though.
It is a very controlled enterprise. This is very logistically complicated. There's a lot of people on it.
Well, the fact you had to get a judge involved to just, hand people evictions. And 2-hour evictions, not like an actual eviction. It's just like, you can't be here for 2 hours. It's a bizarre profession. There's very few people who do this job because there aren't too many controlled demolitions. It's usually like a certain height of building, right? I believe the tallest building that's ever been explosively demolished was the Hudson department store in Detroit, right? And they had to do all kinds of strange prep to it. They had to actually fill all its basement levels with dirt because if the building collapsed into its basement, it would knock down the buildings across the street.
Right.
Nice.
Makes sense.
Sometimes they do kind of goofy stuff for movies, which is fun. They do like pyrotechnics. They take buildings down in weird ways. You know, they do that in Las Vegas a lot.
Stunt building.
Yes. The biggest piece of evidence for me that this was not a controlled demolition, other than the fact that it would be logistically impossible to rig these buildings for demolition with no one noticing, is that the collapse started where the plane hit the building, right? And not from the bottom, which is where you would start one of these. So you could do
alleged plane.
No,
the hologram hit.
The holographic plane hit the building there, and then it started from there, and that's how. Oh my God, I don't even know where to start anymore.
Just as an engineer, this whole thing just throws you for a loop, huh?
And it's like, well, it was a hologram of a plane. Well, then they put the explosives up there, I guess, as opposed to where they would logically put them. Unless it was a hologram of an explosion. You might as well make the whole building a hologram at that point.
We're now getting into the
building
Jean
never
Baudrillard
existed.
thing. Yeah, 9/11 didn't happen.
That's very hard, yeah.
It's phantom time hypothesis. The Earth is flat.
Quantum mechanics on that shit.
Oh my God. So a lot of conspiracy theorists disagree. Like, no steel frame skyscraper had collapsed because of fire before the World Trade Center did.
Well, crucially, nobody had flown an airliner into one before.
Yes.
Like, granted, they flew a small bomber into the Empire State Building, but like the Empire State Building also had a bigger core. It was like it was a smaller plane.
Entirely different structural system.
It wasn't
yes.
going as fast. It was like lost in fog.
Yes.
Yep.
Yeah, they're going pretty slow. It's much, much, much smaller plane.
And then there was that one guy who flew a Cessna into the IRS building, but like, come on, man, it's a Cessna.
Oh, look at this website. Justin, I did spend some research time here myself. I read this entire PDF.
I didn't read the entire PDF. I didn't realize they had a 50-page PDF until just before.
I am not a crackpot.
But I did look at the goddamn architects and engineers for 9/11 Truth page.
Huge mistake.
All I can say is like 33,000 plus people with PEs and AIAs believe this shit.
I mean, you get like anti-vax doctors and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
It's I don't know. You can be good at some stuff and then also really dumb. I don't know how else to explain it, man.
Education doesn't work.
No.
All right, so we're gonna look at some of the evidence. There's the lobby explosions, squibs, concrete pulverization is a big one. Logistics of Bush secretly putting bombs in the towers, and of course the thermite. One of the things I said is for months after September 11th, the investigators were unable to persuade FEMA to obtain basic data like detailed blueprints of the buildings that collapsed.
Sure. You're telling me that FEMA is like negligent?
I mean,
I don't know what you're talking about.
one of the things about buildings, right, is that we talked about the as-built earlier. Here's the as-built rant. The as-built are essentially the blueprints, right? They're not blue anymore, right? Here's a sense of as-built I had to work with.
Photocopy burn.
When I was still working at one of my earlier jobs, right? One of the earliest subjects philosophers pondered was the nature of knowledge, right?
Holy Jesus.
Epistemology.
Yes. What can we know?
Plato's World Trade Center.
Did you pay for the license for that World Trade Center?
What do we know? What can we know? Can we know that we know? Is knowledge possible? This is called epistemology.
Known unknowns, and there's unknown unknowns.
That's right.
That's what
Yes.
man once said.
Yes. Sean Rumsfeld, I believe, was his name. Sean, where were you in early 2000s?
Added to list of suspects.
I have seen Sean and Saddam Hussein in the same room at the same time.
All I gotta say is put a pin in me, okay?
Modern construction has settled these questions once and for all. The only thing we can know is that we know nothing. After the work of architects, structural engineers, mechanical engineers, contractors, subcontractors, and dozens of project managers come together, there are two distinct end products: the building and the as-built documents showing how the building was finally built. And they bear a tenuous relationship at best.
They sure as fuck do. Go off, King.
As-built documents display for all to see our lack of knowledge of our own creations. And as such, to hide our shame, we usually store them in a rusty filing cabinet, under a leaky water heater, in a locked closet to which only two people have the keys, both of whom are retired. Then, 10 years later, when some major alteration or renovation occurs, these waterlogged documents are removed from their prison, scanned, saved as a low-resolution PDF, and handed off to an intern to clean up the photocopy or burn as best they can so design work can commence.
Sounds like Justin might have been that guy at one point.
Contractors are given these designs and then throw them out and work from actual field conditions, requesting change orders as needed and cursing design professionals all the while. Once the work is substantially complete, design professionals return to survey the work completed and create a new set of as-built built based on the original photocopied set, and the cycle continues.
Yes. Can I tell an as-built story?
Yes.
Please.
We were building this was 6-7 years ago at this point. We were building a new hotel / residential right by the Staten Island Ferry on the Staten Island side. And it was a complicated job because we had to do the foundation around the Staten Island Railroad, which ran under this property. So there was a bunch of piles drilled and whatever. There was just like a whole bunch of shit. But one of the things that had to be done was a ton of tiebacks. Justin, what's a tieback?
Tieback is when you're throwing a cable back to hold a retaining wall, right?
Thank you. Yes. So we're throwing cables back to hold a retaining wall, and that involves drilling into the ground. When the contractor looked at the as-builts, they said, oh, this drill rig here can clearly, with no problem, with no danger whatsoever, drill into the soil of Staten Island in this area because this high tension power line running under the ground is about 10, 15 feet away from where we're building, where the as-built says it was. We're working on like a Tuesday morning, and all of a sudden the fucking stoplights and all the lights around us go off, and we see this one guy in an operator in the operators union just like shitting his pants, and we realize that as-built was horribly, tragically wrong, and he had drilled with his drill rig directly into half of the power for downtown Staten Island. I don't know how many volts were in that fucking machine, and all the guys standing in it. And because we were drilling piles too, there was fucking water everywhere. People were standing in puddles. But thank God nobody actually got hurt on that. But essentially, as-built almost killed like 15, 20 people because it said the line was in one place and it ended up being the other. So fuck as-built, man.
Well, you got to call 811.
Yeah, 811 has the fucking as-builts.
That's one of the weird things. I know the Philadelphia Water Department has legendarily accurate maps of underground utilities, which is why the city is trying to privatize it all the time.
They will never, ever succeed in privatizing it. Ever.
The city is in the pocket of big filing cabinet.
We live in hell, but like Philly Water is amazing because it's impossible to open an account there. Like Philly Water actively just does not want your money. They might want your landlord's money, but they don't want you to pay them.
Cool.
So like it's impossible to like set up an account or close an account. So I think everyone in Philly is just sort of stuck in this hell where sometimes we just send Philly Water like $90 every so often. And I assume they just spend it on like, weed. Maybe they go to dinner or whatever.
Extremely accurate subsurface mapping.
I've never paid for water in this city. Yeah.
Municipal service. Yeah.
My God. So yeah, as-builts are useless. This is an example of an as-built I was provided. You can see a wide variety of lines that should be there, which are not. You can see miles photocopier
lines that should not be that are.
Right.
I believe the date on this document is 1930 something.
Mm-hmm.
That's that good old school photocopier burn.
Yes.
All the drunk people that made that site are long dead. You can't even ask them.
Well,
oh no, they're still around. You could go ask old Jim where he put the power lines.
The building itself looks very good. I will say that. Some people may be able to identify it. I'm not going to identify it on the podcast because I don't want terrorists to take this document and figure out the lighting profile of the 24th floor of Suburban Station.
Names have been changed to protect the guilty.
Yes.
Yeah, this is a urban station.
Yeah, urban station.
Urban type station.
So, all right. So we're back to a slide we already showed. One of the 9/11 conspiracies, right, was that there were a couple of explosions in the basement and on a few floors, including the lobby and sky lobbies, which occurred after the plane hit, or depending on who you ask, before the plane hit, right? And the official explanation for this is either you don't acknowledge it or you say there was some jet fuel that poured down the elevator shafts and it ignited, which caused explosions further down the building, right? Some people think this is kind of unlikely. Was there really that much jet fuel, or did Bush put some bombs in the towers, right?
Well, like, I put this in, but remember that in 1993, the same fucking thing happened in reverse.
Yeah.
Where you had an explosion in the basement and it just sent smoke up.
Yeah, exactly. It makes a lot of sense. If a building goes through, if a building goes through the planes, no, if a plane goes through the towers.
Just cop mindset 9/11 hijackers. Like the building was involved in a plane involved crashing. I was in fear for my life. I had to like fly the plane into it. I had a gun.
I forgot I was going to say something back when we were looking at the fireproofing that was shit, which is
those buildings, no angels.
ABAC. All buildings are cursed. So you get a plane that crashes through the buildings, right? She dumps a whole shitload of jet fuel over several floors. That'll go down a couple of elevator shafts. That'll hit the sky lobby first, right? Then that'll also hit the elevator that goes down to the main lobby, right?
The proletariat elevator.
Yeah, exactly. That'll also probably hit the service area elevator.
Setting off all of the thermite that's stored in there.
Yeah, exactly, right? And, this fuel, it may not be much, but it will be certainly pretty well atomized. You'll have a good fuel-air mixture to cause a real big boom, right? And it's being confined by drywall.
Oh, so it comes down, and then when it's actually released into the air, it explodes.
Yes, exactly.
It's fine, and then it's not any longer. That makes sense.
So, yeah, it'll cause some big explosions further down the tower. The other thing is, like, it wasn't like everyone was killed in these various areas. It was like, there's a big boom, lots of stuff was disheveled. So, yeah, and the other thing is, like, if this was because Bush put bombs in the towers, they didn't work. Because, presumably you would want below grade explosives.
Allegedly, the plane's insurance policy.
Yeah, the bombs actually holograms.
Planes and the bombs were holograms. Okay, yes. These bombs didn't work because it would have taken down the towers. Like, there's no reason to weaken structural members underneath where the plane crashed, which brings
3 or
us
4 hours before it falls. Like, just have some red explosion.
Brings us to our next one. This is a picture from Architects and Engineers for 9/11 Truth.
Oh, fuck.
Which are squibs. Not like the Matt Christman complaining on live stream squibs but the squibs, which are explosions of debris, which are the result of explosives in the towers, right?
Which are just placed randomly. Always conveniently, like a few floors below the collapse.
Yeah, so these are supposed to be puffs of smoke from explosives which are detonating further down in the towers, right? So there's a couple things which we have to look at here. One of which is something called detonation velocity, right? Detonation velocity is sort of the speed at which an explosive explodes, right? In the most literal sense. This is why when there was that big explosion in Beirut, some internet nerds were immediately able to look at it, get sort of a bearing on the distance and the time, and they're like, yep, that's ammonium nitrate, all right, because that's a known detonation velocity, right? So if you look at these squibs on video, they're sort of like a sort of slow expulsion of debris that then gets faster, then it gets slower. Again, I gave up putting video in here because it was too goddamn difficult.
I hate to get sued by Loose Change LLC.
.net.
.net.
Whatever.
.com.
They have an Earthlink email address, but they are very serious about copyright infringement.
They're very litigious.
This is for educational purposes. We are fine.
I thought this was for parody purposes.
Both.
This whole episode's satirical.
Yes.
By now.
Right.
No, actually, we do think Bush put bombs in the towers. Yes. So
wait, were you saying that to ensure that it's parody?
Yeah. He's twirling his mustache. He's bringing the bomb. Okay. Anyway. So
holographic bombs. Yes, go on.
This does not indicate like any kind of high velocity explosive. This indicates that there's some pressure pushing down from, like, say, floors collapsing inside the towers. There's a bunch of air that rushes out the path of least resistance, which turned out to be the one window that had a slightly bad installation, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because if it were an actual explosive, it would start out fast and then go slow, as opposed to start out slow, then go fast, then go slow, right? And they also don't follow any pattern you would expect for controlled explosions. If you're going to take out columns in order to allow this to proceed unimpeded, you don't take out one or two random columns in this building with 1 million columns on every side. You take out the whole damn row.
Save on explosives.
It's neoliberal terrorism.
That's right.
So okay, yeah, it was terrorism. It just didn't work. The planes did the job. The planes did it. This is the main argument.
Added to suspect list.
They put in redundancy just in case.
Yeah, they put in really shitty redundancy.
We just do the Ustica thing, which is Bush was trying to blow up the towers, and then coincidentally 9/11 happened.
That's kind of how I feel JFK happened, but that's pretty.
Yeah, you just have some like CIA mafia team sighting him up, and then his head fucking explodes anyway.
That's like the Don DeLillo theory. If anyone's read
Libra, yeah,
great book.
Here's one, which I always thought was a little bizarre. One thing which I've never quite figured out whether it's indication of it was a controlled demolition or is also not indication that it's a controlled demolition, which is that the towers were in free fall the entire time they came down, right?
Oh yeah, that's what you get, like dudes measuring the like falling speed and like slow-mo on like early YouTube.
Yes. Now the biggest hole in this theory is that the towers did not come down in free fall. Yeah. A lot of every floor absorbed kinetic energy from the floor falling behind it or on top of it, right? This whole mass then kept coming down and down and down, again, pancaking, right? Every time the next collapse took shorter than the last one, right? But it still was not enough to arrest the collapse of the building, right? There's a man named Dr. Frank Greening who did a paper on this that I'll link in the description. He does a lot of really extensive calculations involving energy and mass, right? And how much it would affect the velocity of the collapsing section of the building. And the timing of the collapse was estimated by local seismometers, right? The first World Trade Center fell in 12.6 seconds, right? The second one fell in 11.5 seconds. Free fall.
Once again, just visualize 9/11.
Mm-hmm.
Free fall from the top of the building would be.
Go to your 9/11 place and imagine this happening.
Yes. If you drop something off the top of the building, free fall would be 9.1 seconds, right? And this is complex and annoying calculations, but the overall energy of the collapse would have been about 272 tons of TNT, or about a quarter of a small atomic bomb, right?
How much nanothermite, though?
Oh, my God.
Put away your graphing calculator. I'm joking.
So the other thing is, like, is this enough to pulverize all the concrete in the building, which is one of the big conspiracies? Like, oh, there were no big chunks of concrete in the debris, and it's like, well, you know, as we
there wasn't that much concrete in the building.
Not that much concrete in the building. Yeah, it was all drywall.
8 inches of concrete with like presumably wire mesh just to hold it together.
Yeah.
And it's like, yeah, it is there. It's just in a single pancake layer with a bunch of like dead firefighters sandwiched in between it. Like, great, cool.
It's mostly just completely just pulverized into dust. Yeah. Just by the energy of this collapse.
I don't know if this even needs to be said, but as again, somebody that works with a lot of like finished concrete too, like, I don't know if people need to hear that concrete will pulverize really easily, but it does. It's not going to hold together all that great if you got the force of a building coming down on it. But anyway,
simply don't worry about it.
I'm not going to hold up too well. Yeah, if the building's coming down, it's the building's coming down.
Yeah, you know what else isn't going to hold up to that force is me.
Your organs, yeah.
Or stockbrokers for that matter.
Yeah, that's right.
Load-bearing stockbrokers.
Another question is, how difficult is it to rig up a building with explosives, right? Is there like a precedent for a job this big being done in secret, which, funnily enough, there kind of is.
I love it. Go on.
In 1978, a college student at Princeton University realized that, owing to the recently completed Citicorp centers, that's this guy here, very strange structural design, it was more heavily affected by quartering winds than perpendicular wind loads, which are the usual load case engineers tested for right? Quartering winds is when it comes at the building diagonally as opposed to perpendicular against the wall, right? Now, since during the construction of this building, Bethlehem Steel had managed to sub out welded connections for bolted connections.
Sure.
This meant the building was significantly weaker than expected, and
just sub out an entire work process and make a different one happen. Love to see that.
They found out that about a 16-year storm, assuming the power went out and the tuned mass damper stopped working, a 16-year storm might just knock the building clean over.
Cool.
So for about 3 months, construction crews entered the building after the office workers went home. They welded plates over the bolted connections, and they left before office workers came in the next day, right? The engineers discussed evacuation plans with city officials. The city government almost went through with them because Hurricane Ella looked like it was about to hit New York City before the work was done, but it veered out to sea. This was in 1978. This was kind of secret, but you had a huge number of guys involved with the work, right? It was kind of like if someone asked, like, hey, what are you doing? It's like, I'm doing reinforcement work because they fucked up the building. Oh, okay.
It's like, it's not public knowledge necessarily, but it's like professional knowledge.
Yeah, it's not like you're doing something bad. You're just trying not to tell anyone about it.
Certain people what exactly is you're doing, and they don't ask because they're accountants and they just go home at 5:00 and then you come in and then you leave in the morning.
Yeah,
and you probably get a nice chunk of overtime out of it too.
Yeah, exactly. You get a shitload of overtime. You're gonna talk to anyone. So no one knew about this until 1995 when the New Yorker wrote a story about it. Right. There's also a press strike at the time, which helped a bunch.
Still, though, successful conspiracy to do the opposite of demolishing a building.
Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, if you're keeping something which is slightly unethical but beneficial to the public secret, I think that's maybe not so hard. But if you're trying to get the same amount of people to put bombs in the building,
yeah, like how many, like Sean, how bad do construction workers hate stockbrokers that you could convince all of them to be like, yeah, we're just gonna kill all of these guys, also probably a bunch of firefighters and cops and shit. Don't tell anybody though.
All I gotta say is, like, when you were knocking off at like 8:30, 9:00 and walking down the stairs and the stockbrokers were walking up the stairs, a lot of them would have been fucking shoulder checked. It would have been a messy fucking scene, and there's no way that some guy would have yelled in the other's face like, listen, you cocksucker, I'm putting it together so you could fucking live. I'm welding gusset plates on there. Fuck you, buddy. Fuck you. You can't imagine it happening in a calm and orderly fashion. Fuck those guys. Fuck the individual stockbrokers that worked in the City Court building back in the 1970s. Fuck them.
Yeah, if you're listening to this and you worked in the City Court building as a stockbroker, fuck you.
Yeah, fuck you.
Always.
So, I mean, but for Bush to put bombs in the towers, you need to find a couple hundred workers who were just A-OK with cramming an occupied building full of explosives. And also, even if you find that many unethical people, you need to also make sure they're not worried about liability in any fashion, right?
You'd have to pay me triple time at least.
Yeah, I was
and you
about
gotta stop anybody from finding the explosives.
Mm-hmm.
Or noticing that, like, you and your guys are, like, coming into their offices and moving shit around and putting shit on columns.
Yeah, and, like, probably coming down in the swing stage on the outside of the building to do the outside of the column.
Can I get into the conspiracy shit real quick? Because I watched fucking Loose Change, the one that came out, like, it's like the most recent one, like the final Loose Change that came out.
How are there like 6 versions of this fucking movie?
I didn't realize there was more than one. I only watched one of them.
People keep debunking them. Yeah,
they keep finding more change in their pockets.
Tons of change, more change than you could even fucking imagine.
You're just
I'm watching
into the sofa
in anticipation of this, and like normally with conspiracy theories, you just kind of like let them wash over you. You're watching and you're like, oh yeah, maybe that checks out. Maybe this checks out. But there was this whole segment in that movie. It wasn't long. It was like just a few minutes. But they're like, one of the commercial residents of the World Trade Center was a company called Turner Construction. Turner Construction was connected to George W. Bush, and they were also connected to the National Institute of Safety and Testing, or whatever it's called. And I'm looking at this, having worked for Turner Construction before. I literally did a job for Turner. They're this like
9/11.
They're like one of like, there's like Turner and Skanska and Saudi bin Laden Group are like the biggest fucking ones in the entire world. And this idea that they're trying to make these connections between Turner Construction and the NIST and like the like George Bush's family. It's like, oh, good job, guys. You came up, you discovered the idea of there being a ruling class.
Yeah.
Like, of course, the CEO of Turner Construction knows George W. Bush because they are part of the capitalist class. They fucking rule us. But there was like done in this sort of nefarious way, which was supposed to think that Turner, because they had a spot in the building, they were part of like contracting out, putting in the nanothermite or whatever. It's like, it's not that complicated, okay? The ruling class sticks around. They all know each other. And if you're like, at Turner Construction, of course, you've institutionally captured the NIST and have like a lot of power over that. It's not fucking complicated. You don't need a conspiracy.
Yeah, I was about to say Turner is a big fucking firm. It's like, the only bigger ones are like Bechtel and like, I don't know,
right. All the ones in the Iraq War, like
Saudi
Kellogg Brown and
Root,
Root and Halliburton. Yeah, I guess the point is that like you don't need. There can be a conspiracy, but it's not a conspiracy to do 9/11. It's just to like make as much money as possible and like secure their class position.
Secure the bag.
Yeah, exactly.
That's
the bag full of nanothermite.
That's the structural shit I was talking about before. Like, you don't need to impute agency to these Turner executives, like sneaking a bunch of us up there at night to try to put in this thermite when they were simply taking a contract. They simply stayed in the building and they simply knew other members of the ruling class. Not complicated.
Which is where we get to our next subject. I swear to God, we're getting close to the end. Thermite. One of the problems for the conspiracy theorists is that there wasn't any explosive residue at the site that might be left by RDX or other blasting materials, which,
as we said, easy to detect. Those whole piles were like climbed all over by every like explosives detection dog in half of the US.
I like the idea that a plane did hit the World Trade Center, but it was that whatever Iranian F-16 that ended up at the side of the hill in Italy.
Yeah.
or
Libyan plane.
Getting really lost.
The explanation is that these buildings were taken down by thermite, noted explosive thermite, right? And thermite is made out of iron oxide and aluminum powder. There's some variations on this, right? Both of which are found in quantity at the collapse site on account of the building being made of steel with aluminum cladding, thus making it the perfect crime.
Shot with an ice bullet.
Yes.
Why not?
So the big problem here...
built the explosives into the building. That's what it was.
Even if they did that, I don't think they could have cut the columns with thermite. One of the problems is that thermite is not an explosive. Thermite is a powder that burns very, very hot, right? Hot enough that it can melt steel, yes, but you need a hell of a lot of it to melt the steel, right? Especially if you're melting it for the intention of cutting it. It's very, very good at welding, and that's one of its most common use. They use it to weld railroad tracks, right? But if you want to cut the steel, you need a huge quantity of thermite per the amount of like area you want to cut through, right?
It would be the equivalent, like instead of using it, because we cut steel with oxy, right? Oxyacetylene. You would need to put the thermite on top and let it like work its way through.
Yeah, you would need to like build like a big hopper, right, around the column, and of course these are the exterior columns, so they're hollow. right?
Right.
And then you fill that hopper with thermite. This is my best approximation. A couple people have tried to prove this, and they're like actual 9/11 conspiracy theorists, and they've all screwed up. And none of it worked. And a lot of times they're doing horizontal columns and not vertical ones. And the vertical column is particularly difficult because what you might wind up doing is just this entire thermite, it melts, it adheres to the outside of the column, and suddenly instead
it's
of
made the building stronger.
Yes.
We've just added an extra
yes,
weld.
exactly. That's what you'd wind up doing.
The opposite 9/11.
Reverse 9/11.
Reverse 9/11. The tower has just got 10 stories taller.
You just badly inconvenience the FDNY because they have to recruit like 100 more firefighters to just appear.
I'm looking at the hopper idea, and I believe you that this is the best idea for it. And the idea of just like you're pouring thermite into it and then letting it go through the column on the outside. You're like directing it downwards into one place. Couldn't it also flow through the hopper and then just like, whatever?
You would also need like a magnesium strip here. You would have to ignite with some kind of electric igniter. Right, and magnesium.
Yeah, you see a guy going round on like the swing stage with a lighter.
No, that's the other thing. You would have to get access to the outside of the building with a swing stage or something like that in order to get this thing installed.
I didn't see any of those on the outside of the building in the video. Wouldn't you see like a little thermite hopper like on the outside?
No, I would assume it would fit inside the cladding, but you would have also seen a bunch of window washers taking off the cladding.
There's a bunch of CIA window washers base jumping to safety.
Are there enough CIA guys who are brave enough to get in a swing stage?
Oh shit! Okay, so we're punching a bunch of holes in the thermite thing.
That's more holes than the thermite would punch in the steel.
Yeah.
It's either not happening or you're adding floors to the building.
Okay, so what if instead of thermite, you use thermite, but it behaves the way I want it to?
Nano thermite. All right, so this is a real material. It's a real thing that exists. Okay. And that's what Bush put in the towers when he was twirling his evil villain mustache, right?
Was nanothermite.
How would he have had time?
So
he was the president, man. People were. He had a schedule. People were following him around with cameras. The Secret Service was there. How would he take the time off to go to New York, go to the World Trade Center? This theory, no, I don't think it's very serious. I don't think George W. Bush, while being the president, commuted to his second job of putting nanothermite in the.
It was Jeb. If Jeb did it, Jeb did 9/11.
Even if you don't go the like reductum ad absurdum, route here and say that Bush himself did it. Regardless, if they contracted it out to Turner Construction International, it would be a lot of work. It would be like noticeable work, a lot of work, and really hard and complicated work to do.
No one's ever taken down a building with thermite. A lot of buildings have been taken down with high velocity explosives, which is why nanothermite comes in here. Nanothermite is an actual material. The idea is you make the particles of iron oxide and aluminum oxide very, very, very small. That's why it's nano. Some people also call it super thermite, right? And that increases the rate of reaction, so you get an actual explosion as opposed to a slow but very hot burn, right? And that would also mean less thermite would need to be used. So here's the big problem with that. No one's been able to synthesize nanothermite in quantities higher than like 2 or 3 grams Even
nobody except the CIA.
Yes,
They
obviously.
just got a dumpster full of that stuff, and they're just wheeling it in.
Even to this day, no one's figured out how to synthesize it. And
just the entire black budget of the CIA is going to producing 5 tons of super
they're
thick.
still paying off those debts. Yeah. They can do this, but they can't prevent an F-117 from being shot down by a Serbian baker. So yeah, this material, it exists. It's real, but like no one can figure out how to synthesize it. And that's why what I say is like thermite is to 9/11 conspiracies as adrenochrome is to QAnon, right?
Fair enough.
It's like a fairly simple and common substance which has been assigned magic properties, right? Adrenochrome is actually just oxidized adrenaline, which has been synthesized in labs for over 100 years now, by the way. You don't have to get it from a child's adrenal gland.
Sound like an infomercial there, just cracking open a child, and you're like, if only there was a better way.
Yes, there is a better way. Now we have to get to Building 7. So the reason I kept this short, because I knew it was going to go this fucking long.
Building 7, though, that is like the go-to thing. I mean, even I'm a little whatever about Building 7. It seems pretty sketchy.
Why did it collapse, right?
It looks pretty bad from the video that's out. I will agree with that. It looks kind of weird. One of the things is like, okay, Building 7 collapsed at about 5 o'clock when the towers went down.
Like 10-ish.
10-ish. One was 9:50 something, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So
and like also Tower 7, Building 7 is like also the one with all of the like emergency operation shit in it. So that's another angle.
It had the SEC, it had the CIA in there. It had the DSA in there.
Like New York City municipal offices with all of like the tax documents for all sorts of corporations and shit.
Actually, DSA was a couple blocks that way. Not affected in this disaster.
Do not pin this on Barbara Ehrenreich, okay?
Building 7 did not get hit by a plane. It didn't have the massive structural trauma inflicted on it.
You did a 9/11. You did a no growth.
Yeah.
You did a thermite.
But the thing is,
you did a cantilever transfer girder.
The thing is that this building burned for a very, very long time, right? And it burned on many, many floors simultaneously, right? If you look at like previous high-rise fires, like One Meridian Plaza or something like that, it was like 1 or 2 floors going at once, right? You look at further structural fires, there's stuff like Grenfell, which is mostly on the exterior, and then like there's actually been 1 or 2. There's been 2 steel frame skyscrapers that have collapsed from extensive fires since then. One in Iran, one in Sao Paulo, which I forgot to put in here. So I'll link those in the description. What we said about fire ratings being kind of relative, I think, is relevant here. In this case, Building 7 was rated throughout with fireproofing for 2 to 3 hours. 2 hours on the floor joists, 3 hours on the main structural columns, and it burned for 7 hours, right? Also, so
it exceeded expectations.
Yes, and mostly with your gypsum-based spray-on fireproofing, right? And this building was built in 1988. It probably had a lot fewer issues than 1 and 2 World Trade Center. The other thing is it has a very fucked up structural system. So above the 7th floor, relatively conventionally framed building between floors 5 and 7, you had this system of transfer girders. This is because the building was built on top of a consolidated Edison substation, which was designed to be eventually overbuilt by a 25-story building. This is a 47-story building, so they had to make some changes.
You put in the giant overhang, I guess.
Just cantilever like millions of tons of steel and concrete and glass just right over that substation.
Throw it over on its side. It's fine.
Which is fine.
That's fine.
That's fine. As long as it doesn't catch on fire on every floor.
Oh, yeah. So long as 9/11 doesn't happen, you're okay.
That's
but
fine.
then 9/11 happens.
Most buildings do great if there's no 9/11.
That's true, yeah. Famously, one of the weaknesses of buildings is when 9/11 happens.
Very few buildings have had a 9/11 happen to them. And of those, I think only one has survived, which was the Verizon building right over here.
Well, there was the Greek Orthodox Church. I think that made it through okay.
Oh, no, that got flattened. That was they're rebuilding it now. That's the one building of the complex they haven't finished yet.
The people that say reject modernity, embrace tradition, yeah, not looking so good there on that Orthodox church.
Anyway, the official story here, and what I think is correct, look at column 79 here, right? Column 79 would be about right here in this diagram, right? So
approximate location of kink.
Yes. And the way this worked was, this is also a kind of a tube frame building like the World Trade Center, but the core was a little bit more substantial, but also you can see there's a lot more columns on the exterior. But also it had these weird trusses at the bottom, right? So column 79 was the first to fail. That's why you saw the penthouse collapse in first in the video. And you can sort of see the penthouse collapse into the building, see a bunch of windows break, and then the whole building seems to collapse from well below where the camera angle is. And that's why people say this is a controlled demolition, right? The thing is, we can't go too much into detail about this because, again, we're running out of time. Once this column goes, on account of it's got no bracing, it started to buckle under extreme heat. It's basically in line with truss number 1 right here, right? So it starts to, pull on that. And truss number 1, which is again also under an extreme amount of heat, fails. That'll knock down a couple more columns. That's also going to bring the whole structural system down real quick, just because, at some level, this building was extremely interconnected with the rest of the building.
No, I was just saying that, like, because you have that cantilever, when that thing essentially rips off the side of the building, it brings all of the other truss, all the other structural steel down with it.
Yeah, and from the outside, it just looks like it tears itself apart spontaneously, right? And so that's where you get the, I guess, controlled demolition in miniature thing.
Yeah, I mean, it looks like it comes down from the bottom because it did come down from the bottom, but it wasn't because of explosives. It was because of, well, this is how they built it.
Poorly.
I don't understand, though. How is it ripping down from the bottom, though? What happened to the bottom? Was that the weakness from the heat?
I imagine it's weakness from the heat. And again, like you got these big trusses, and if they're being pulled over and you got the columns above, the columns which are, again, attached with whatever, to column 79, if one of these columns comes down and enough columns are attached to other columns with weird trusses, I imagine this whole damn thing comes down pretty quickly. But the load paths here are weird. That's the main thing I would say.
It's like the building in Ghostbusters. This thing is weird, man. I looked at blueprints. This thing is weird. It's a conduit for Gozar the Gozarian.
The other thing was, like, if it was a controlled demolition, it was pretty fucking sloppy. And of course, the main thing is, like, what if it didn't get hit by debris? What was the excuse for demolition? So, this is... But yeah, so buildings... we don't have time to go into detail about this. Maybe we'll do... I mean, we're not even talking about the Pentagon, which is another whole kettle of fish. So obviously there's more to do, but World Trade Center,
holographic kettle, holographic fish,
holographic Building 7, holographic World Trade Centers, holographic
New York City, hologram.
I'm living it.
Yeah, people don't know this, but George Bush, hologram.
The
whole time,
Pentagon, hologram. 9/11 at my school, hologram. They didn't tell us about it. It was fucking weird. It's just like, wow, it's weird that a bunch of kids have doctor's appointments today. I believe it was Miss Esposito who came out during recess to say this, but nothing bad is happening.
Famously something you want to hear when everyone's away.
My dad picked us up at school. He's like, bad news, guys.
9/11
happened.
And of course, nobody knew what 9/11 was yet. So you were just like, what?
Well, that's a conspiracy right there.
How did they know? How did the parents?
And what's the aftermath of this? Yeah. Well, I mean, you're living in it.
Yeah,
like this is what happened. History happened. Osama bin Laden's goal with the attacks was push America into a massive overreaction that makes it explicitly inimical to Muslims, destroys its economy, destabilizes it to the point of imperial collapse. All of that happened, and then he won, retired. I don't feel a lot better about that just because he gets killed eventually, like in his retirement home.
I was about to say, you figure, I'm done with the job. Why do you even bother killing him at that point? But
yeah. And I mean, you see here some of the slogans that various troops have written on bombs that were then dropped on Afghanistan and Iraq. And
Krugman told me that there was no anti-Muslim sentiment after 9/11.
That's right. Famously not. Americans on the whole reacted very well.
I thought those NYPD and NYFD patches were painted on, and I was going to say that is an incredible attention to detail.
That's my local firehouse there on one of those patches. How do you like that?
Engine 277, lat 112. Cool.
Parenthetically, my grandfather was a firefighter at that time. I mean, he was like an older guy. He was like the chaplain or whatever, and he went down right after the towers collapsed, and all of his guys were there. And he saw all the dust everywhere, and they told him to set up like a center, like a triage down there. And he said, go fuck yourself. And he's like, I'm going above 42nd Street. So he took his entire shit and he sent it up to Midtown because he knew, like, if you're rational, you knew that dust was not good for you. Yeah. There's that combination of asbestos and gypsum and, of course, fucking concrete. Like, nobody needs scoliosis in their lungs. People, Giuliani and all of them knew that was bad. But obviously a lot of people
knew, and they tried to screw all of those guys out of like any compensation for it for years.
Yeah, they're still doing it. Yeah.
Yeah. Disaster, man.
And I mean, 2,977 people die. Total global war on terror deaths, conservatively, like well over 500,000. Still going up, like every day, like today. There's not, like, America was doing torture and it was doing assassinations before, but like after 9/11, there stopped being any pretense that like that was something that America was like above. You don't need me to tell you that created a massive expansion in the exact same Salafist jihadist ideology that produced 9/11 in the first place, that then necessitated more military intervention and begets ISIS and Al-Shabaab and Al-Qaeda and wherever. And I mean, I did some maths, and fewer people would have died if the US response had been to do nothing, and fewer people would have died if the US response had been to load up a couple of passenger airplanes with Marines, fly them into the 2 tallest buildings in Kabul, and then do the same thing every day for 6 months. It doesn't, like, those numbers don't really, it's difficult to comprehend exactly how much destruction was wrought as a consequence of 9/11. And the sort of, I guess the political consequences of making war on Afghanistan and Iraq and the aftermath of it. And yeah, no, classic blowback. Don't fund these psychos.
Yes.
And they still do it. They still do it every time. There's someone in the US or the UK who is like, no, okay, I've got this one jihadist guy, but like I'm pretty sure I can control him. And enemy of my enemy, right? And so and eventually this happens again. The same thing happened with the Manchester arena bombing, where MI5 walked a guy into and out of Libya to go fight Gaddafi, and then he comes back and he blows himself up. It's just depraved, man.
It's far be it for me to plug other random podcasts on here, but Blowback Pod, which came out like 4 or 5 months ago, is tremendous in not just the timeline, but understanding what happened after 9/11, understanding what was happening in Iraq and how Iraq became the sort of fulcrum, became like the target for the United States, and of course what the consequences are since then.
Yeah, it's so wild how much of that's just gone in the memory hole. Like how people were thinking, how people were acting after 9/11, and now you can have Paul Krugman, Nobel laureate in economics, just write on Twitter. On the whole, Americans didn't have this upswell of anti-Muslim or anti-Arab sentiment after 9/11.
It's not just the government officials, because they should all be at least in The Hague, if not worse. It's not the commanders that went over there and did the highway of death and all that shit. The media, the people, our media, as we look on Twitter or we watch TV news or we read the newspaper, whatever it is, these motherfuckers who were directly culpable in helping to bring us into this war have suffered zero fucking consequences. Worse than that, they're still out there and they're still fucking peddling the same lies, and there's no consequences whatsoever.
Also, to do a bit of a callback, when I make the joke about visualizing 9/11, the reason you can do that is, how many times have you seen that footage and where have you seen it, right? It was the only thing that was running on every TV channel for weeks afterwards.
Nope.
And every time there was some new atrocity, every time you found out about waterboarding or Abu Ghraib or Guantanamo Bay, you would
9/11,
run that 9/11 footage back.
And the lead up to that war, and trust me, I was a fully grown adult because I'm old as shit at that time. The way that the media and the Bush administration and the Democrats too led us into that fucking disaster, that human disaster, 500,000, 1 million fucking Iraqis dead and counting, was a fucking travesty of what this country is supposed to mean, what truth is supposed to mean, what governance is supposed to mean. I watched it happen in real time and it was fucking disgusting. These motherfuckers just led us by the nose into a fucking massacre.
And I mean, in that sense, proved Osama bin Laden's theory about America and how America would react to an act of terror correct. Not great.
Not great.
Yep.
Not great.
Well, what can you do?
It's history, man. We just live in it.
Yep. Well, on that note, I was about to say on that bombshell, since we have several on screen right
on
here.
That holographic bombshell.
Yeah. No, these are also holograms. We have a segment on this podcast called Safety Third.
Oh, yeah.
I got to do the drop. Fuck, where's my safety third drop?
Shake hands with danger.
Oh my God. All right.
This excites me as a guest, but also a listener of, There's Your Problem Pod.
All right. So we have one from, he says his name. So, hello, There's Your Problem podcast people. My name is Mike, and I used to work as a mechanic at various bowling alleys for 7 years. I have lots of stories of safety issues, but I think I will tell you all my favorite time from when our safety standards broke down.
Yeah, this time on 9/11 when a guy came in and bowled a perfect game.
Prior to my employment at the company, OSHA had come through and forced rigorous lockout, tagout safety standards on the company as a result of a couple of mechanic deaths at other locations.
Oof,
Jesus.
Hate to see it.
Simply put,
what a hell of a
Yeah, you just get caught. Your arm comes back up through the ball return.
these things look like those, Victorian child murdering textile mill things.
It's like the dark satanic mills of Victorian England.
OSHA came through due to a couple of mechanic deaths caused by inserting their heads into the Shino Borlo.
That will.
Simply put, the lockout tagout standards we use meant that a special LOTO power switch was installed on every pin setting machine. We were forbidden from working on, climbing on, or even touching the machines unless the lockout tagout switch was padlocked in the off position to cut off power to the pin setter. This was considered necessary because the particular model of pin setting machines I worked on were designed during the 40s and 50s. Released in 55 and built with various modifications until 1988. Right?
Awesome. Also reminds me of my favorite lockout tagout actual tag, which is sometimes you attach them to the padlock, and one of them was it had a blank field for if energized, blank will happen, and it was explosion will result, killing all within 50-foot radius.
Cool. At least they were honest.
Yeah. As a result, these machines were almost entirely mechanical and have few electrical components. The entire machine is run by a single 1-horsepower motor through a gearbox and a series of cams, levers, and belts.
Oof, that sounds like a fucking death trap. Holy shit.
Most of the machine is built with steel, and there are no sensors of any kind monitoring it. In other words, if a person were to be inside the wrong part of the pin setter when it was running, it would not stop and would just crush them and keep running.
Yep. Get your pin set.
Incredible what one horse can do.
Form a human being into perfect pin shapes.
Never look at a horse the same way. One particular morning, I came in to find that one of our 32 pin setting machines was down unexpectedly. The mechanic from the previous night left a note saying that it had blacked out, and he ran out of time to fix it before he had to leave for the night. Now, a blackout is the most dangerous kind of state these machines can be in for a mechanic. 98% of the time, a blackout is caused by the jam switches. Each pin setter has 2 jam switches that cut power to the machine if they are opened by certain parts of the pin setter, getting jammed in place, such as when a bowling pin gets stuck between them, right? This is to stop the machine from destroying itself trying to continue running, which it absolutely would if it was not shut down immediately. What makes this dangerous is that it requires a mechanic to climb into the machine to remove the stuck pin, which then closes the jam switches and immediately restores power to everything.
Oh, no.
Now, lockout tagout completely cuts power to the whole system, allowing this work to be done safely.
I'm sensing a however.
However, it turned out this machine had not lost power due to a jammed bowling pin. This was one of those 2% of the times it was something electrical at fault. Now, on top of each pin setter was an electrical control box with all the machine's electronics inside, as well as 2 simple glass fuses. These take 0 time at all to check, so I decided to start troubleshooting there first. However, I remembered an incident from a previous bowling alley I had worked at that did not have lockout tagout. Another mechanic on the machine next to me removed the smaller of the 2 fuses and got a small electrical shock, causing him to drop the fuse deep into the machine, and we did not have a spare. It took us until 3 a.m. to find it, and all of that could have been avoided had he simply unplugged the main power cable from the electrical box first, right?
Not this particular type of job, but I remember being like a part-time shitty worker when I was a teenager, and stuff like that would happen all the time. You'd be like there till like 2 a.m. on a school night, like trying to figure out some dumbass fucking problem to fix. Ugh.
So I already had lockout tagout in place, so there was no possibility of getting shocked by the fuse. But I decided to add an extra layer of safety by unplugging the main power cable as well. Now, the cable hangs from the ceiling above each pin setter, so I unplugged it and let it hang nearby while I checked the fuse. The fuse was still good, so I put it back and grabbed the power plug to plug back in as well. The plug arc flashed in my hand.
Nope.
In my peripheral vision, I saw what appeared to be a softball-sized ball of fire where my hand was when this happened.
Hate when that happens.
Instinctively, I jumped off the 7-foot-tall pin setter and ran until I regained my senses a few seconds later and looked for injuries or a potential fire. There was no fire, and I had not received any burns or even a shock. By sheer coincidence, I had grabbed the large cylindrical plastic plug around the side, and the arc flash had come out the top of the plug where the cable enters, leaving me unscathed.
Mm.
But why was there any power at all when lockout tagout was applied correctly? Well, it turns out the company installed the lockout tagout switches themselves and connected them to a small box directly on top of the pin setter's control box. The main power cable plugs into this other box from above. Thus, lockout tagout only isolates the circuit box below that point, and the main power cable always remains live unless a circuit breaker is shut off in another part of the building.
Oh, fuck. That blows.
This was not known to me or anyone else in the company, it seemed.
It wasn't on the as-built.
We were all trained that lockout tagout removes all electrical power all of the time. When I told my supervisor about this, not only did he not believe me when I told him what happened, he accused me of violating lockout tagout. Years later, at a company training session, I was a part of a group being trained by one of the highest technicians in the company. This was the guy who wrote the lockout tagout standards for the company alongside OSHA. When I told him about this incident, he refused to believe it was possible, even though other mechanics in the training session backed me up with their own experiences. So that is the story of how this company, even with OSHA mandated safety regulations, still manages to leave my safety up to personal responsibility.
Always.
Always only hold the plastic part. And yeah. Don't work at a job.
Yes. Good start right there.
Great. It's like when you get into the union, they give you like the insurance package and you find out you get like $200 for a finger, $800 for a hand, like $3,000 for an arm.
What I would recommend is simply not being employed anywhere at any time. The safest way to avoid on-the-job accidents is to never be on the job.
To abolish work.
That's right.
Yes.
And rebar.
Yes.
And rebar.
Anti-rebar action. All right. So
we made it.
That was an episode.
Probably.
That took some time.
Christ, they hate it when we split them, but we may not have any choice.
I might.
Who cares?
Whatever. We'll
I care. I don't want the hogs to like be the.
That's fair.
We'll burn that bridge when we get to it. Anyone got any commercials before we go?
I can do a short plug, I guess. I don't know.
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah. Yeah, everybody, you can follow me, Sean KB, at as_a_worker at twitter.com. And of course, check out my podcast, which is called The Antifada. I've got some really good history episodes coming up with our friend Matt. really good stuff. So yeah, give us a listen, and I hope you like it.
Oh yeah.
Yes. Listen to the Antifada. Let's say, so.
You can't tell people to vote for Jessica Rain anymore, but she did her best.
We got owned.
Yeah. Sorry, Jess.
Real owned. Well, sometimes
between that and Grenfell, where we told people to vote Labour, I'm starting to think that our endorsement is a curse.
Like a reverse 9/11, but for voting.
So yeah,
that's
vote
just
for
a
Donald
regular
Trump.
9/11.
Keep America great.
Yes, exactly.
4 more years.
Yeah.
For election affairs.
I am the Russian election interference.
So you're the Polish election interference.
Well, it's basically the same thing.
Yeah, but it's got a screen door on it. Well, never forget, everybody.
I don't remember what we were talking about.
I don't. It's something about holograms.
It's been a long time, man. There's been a lot of podcasting.
Yeah. Oh my God. All right. What do we do now?
All right. Good night, everybody.
Good night, everyone.
Good night, everyone. Potting with you guys. That was fun.